Chapter 181. The war in the Northlands was still ongoing. It had been almost 2 months since the ambush, and the frozen soil of the Northlands was already covered in blood. Not only was there blood from the humans who were the masters, but there was also blood from the uninvited beastmen and elves. Take down all of Sluir in 10 days, take down the Northlands in 1 month, and attack San Antonio in 3 months. For the beastmen, no one would mention the arrogant words they had said when the ambush had been successful. The tribe leaders had never expected that the humans would be so stubborn. The abnormally successful initial ambush had confused them, and the foolishness of Sluir's higher-ups made them even more optimistic that the war would soon end. In order to quickly break down the humans' resistance, the beastmen chose to annihilate the cities that were fiercely resisting. They chose to send out wolf riders to massacre the villages, and chose to use scorched earth tactic. Now, this decision had been proven to be the stupidest of decisions. The butcher's blade didn't extinguish the Northlanders' fighting spirit. In fact, it was the opposite. The pitiful wails of their own kind and the miserable state of those who were massacred stirred up the bloodlust and anger in the hearts of the people of the Mist. Can you just watch as the women you just married are humiliated to death? Elderly fathers are hung to death because the occupiers wanted to save some food? Did those bastards stab the baby in the spear because of his crying? All of this is happening. Are you still men? If you are, then you should be more willing to fight to the end with me. What's there to be afraid of? It's just death. Is it any worse than living in humiliation right now? After the pitiful state of the occupied and massacred regions spread, the anger buried deep in the hearts of the people of the Mist was finally ignited. Even without the summons of their lord or king, the people of the Mist decided to risk their lives to protect their families and people. The will of the Mist will never yield might only be a slogan, but it was a fact that the people of the Mist had never been conquered by other races for thousands of years. In front of the bloody butcher's blade, the people of the Mist were just like their ancestors. They didn't lower their heads, and the bloodlust that had been engraved in their blood for thousands of years was awakened. The young husband, Emma, kissed his newlywed wife goodbye. He brought along a blunt chopper and joined the militia without any protection or combat power, just so that his future children would not have to worry about being afraid, and that they would not one day become a dazzling object that was stabbed into the ground by a spear. The old veterans held their spears and walked to the front lines. Perhaps they were old and frail, having retired from the army for many years, but their wisdom and experience allowed the new soldiers to avoid the most dangerous traps and grow rapidly in the constant war. They were not like the legendary veteran who carried the coffin into battle, but they had long since believed that they would be lucky to return alive. If this old man's experience can help a few more lads return alive, I will be very satisfied. If I'm a burden, please don't hesitate to abandon me. I'll let those bastards know what it means to be a veteran. If the Red Maple Defense Line and Antoon were the 2 lighthouses that brought hope, then the countless resistance organizations and self-organized militias were the boundless wildfire that set the prairie ablaze. After the sparks were ignited, it would be difficult to extinguish them. What are you afraid of? At most, we'll just die. Living like this is even more humiliating. Perhaps their words were quite crude, but they spoke of the bravery of the northern tribes who were like troublemakers. Damn it, in the end, they're all resistance organizations and guerrilla groups. Those bastards are insane. In the cities that they conquered, any beastman soldier that was left alone would be unable to return to their own camp. The powerful wolf knight was also disappearing in large numbers. The militia that didn't have heavy armor or sharp swords learned how to use the terrain to ambush their enemies and use bait to surround and kill the beasts. Not only did this vengeful slaughter not frighten the people of the Mist, it actually made the flames of hatred burn even more fiercely. They're insane. Have you ever seen a decapitated head stare at you? Have you ever seen a beggar who has lost both his legs suddenly grab onto your legs so that his companions can stab both you and himself? They're basically a bunch of completely irrational lunatics. They were afraid. The warlike beastmen were afraid. The beastmen who viewed dying in battle as an honor were afraid. In front of the bloodshot eyes of the crazed invaders who were willing to perish together with them, in front of the glares of those who died with their eyes wide open, the beastmen were afraid. The beastmen finally understood why those weak humans had been able to block their own species for over 1,000 years, and why their powerful ancestors had been chased back to the northernmost highlands countless times. We can't continue wasting time like this. We absolutely need to destroy the enemy's determination to resist. We need to strike the enemy's vitals with one punch. The beastmen gave up on their strategy of slowly and steadily taking over the human territories. They gave up on the cities on the outskirts and focused all of their efforts on destroying the 2 lighthouses. And so, the Slewir Kingdom's capital city, Antun, was in a state of emergency. The human allied army's main headquarters, Red Maple, was holding the line. The tribe leaders knew that if they didn't get rid of these 2 obstacles, this battle would probably never end. Antun has surrendered. King Fummel has surrendered. When this news spread, people were shocked and in disbelief. Then, they started wailing in extreme pain. The entire country was crying. A veteran soldier in his 70s lost his son, grandson, and son-in-law in this battle. He didn't shed a single tear. When he mentioned his family members who had died in battle, he would often stroke his beard and smile proudly. They're good people. They didn't embarrass me, old Philly. They've fallen, so I, this old guy, will continue to take their place. When I fall, my granddaughter and daughter will take their place as well. I don't believe that I can't chase away those goddamn beasts. But when this news spread, he cried like a child. He collapsed on the ground and pointed a trembling finger towards the north as he cursed angrily. My son, what did you all die for? Is such a bastard country worth risking our lives for? Your deaths weren't worth it at all. This was also the reason why Roland was so furious. When the people of this country hadn't fallen, why should the king, who was their protector, fall? At the very least, the Roland of that year, even though he had turned into a pile of bones, he still turned into a vengeful spirit and returned from hell to fulfill his oath to protect the country. This unyielding battle spirit was also the reason why the people of the Mist remembered the story of the twin stars. This was a nation that would never give up. They would only recognize a king who would never surrender. Fake King Fummel. He doesn't deserve to be king. When the news of Fummel's surrender spread, although this anger and doubt spread among the people, from a certain standpoint, the Beastmen had indeed achieved their goal and dealt a heavy blow to the pride of this nation. In a short period of time, the resistance decreased greatly. Fummel's surrender represented the first time in the history of the Mist royalty had surrendered. This was like a heavy punch that ruthlessly struck the backbone of this nation. Crack. This backbone that was known as the unyielding will of this nation let out a pitiful cry as if it was about to snap. At the same time, the pitiful cry of all the people of the Mist was accompanied by the spirit and will to resist. But fortunately, the previous king, Roland, appeared and executed Fummel Casso on the spot. He declared that the surrender was invalid and handed the throne to the previous king's only daughter, Princess Glena Casso. The Mist royalty has yet to surrender. Our flag has yet to fall. Antun's battle is still ongoing. Our king is still fighting. Fortunately, Roland's appearance reignited the flames of resistance and made them burn even more fiercely. Meanwhile, Roland's oath was the beginning of a new rule for this nation. We, the people of the Mist, have never liked war. We swear to never start a war of our own accord. Old Philly, who had jumped off the cliff while carrying the enemy, shouted this oath. He knew that his daughter and granddaughter had died before him, but this time, he didn't cry. Instead, he patted his chest and nodded proudly. You killed 2 beasts before you died? Well done, as expected of my, old Philly's, son. You guys go first, I'll be right there. We've agreed to meet again in heaven. But if war still comes knocking on our door, we shall let the invaders know the sharpness of our swords. Currently, Emma was already a qualified soldier. In a letter he wrote to his wife, he had already fulfilled this oath. When his comrades checked his belongings and sent him this letter, he had already fulfilled this oath. We do not like war, we do not like war. At this point, we declare that the God of law shall be our national religion. We declare that we will never start a war of our own accord. But if war is truly unavoidable, we shall do everything in our power to protect our homeland. We swear that our people will forever stand at the peak of the Northlands. This short declaration left a new mark in the hearts of this nation. Not only Slúir, but the neighboring Dawnlan, who were also descendants of the people of the Mist, were also repeating this oath. We shall do everything in our power to protect our homeland. We swear that our people will forever stand at the peak of the Northlands. 174 Night Road on the young frigid maw. Under the advice of the senior Lion King, the young beasts that had hatched ahead of time had already signed a new contract with the young knight. Under the fluttering war flag of the Mist, the new generation of Aurora Knight had already completed their final training. Today was the day that the young Aurora Knight would head to the battlefield to support their people. Under the watchful eyes of their families, under the leadership of the undead seniors of the Aurora Knights, the silver warhorses began to float into the sky one after another. The faces of the young knights were still immature, but their arms that held their spears were as steady as a reef. Their gazes were fixed on the distant horizon, where the blood of their kin was flowing. They could not wait to end this war. Let them see what the strongest aerial cavalry squadron in the entire continent looks like. Let them see the pride of the people of the Mist. But when they entered the battlefield, they were destined to become the new focus of the Northlands. Without a doubt, the Aurora Knight, the pride of the people of the Mist, would ignite an even higher flame. And when all the declarations were linked together, when this oath of never going to war transformed into a sword of will that shocked even the gods, the people of the Mist's declaration finally received a response. I, the God of Law, Womians, declare that I will protect the people of the Mist. When the holy silver light descended from the clouds, the people of the Mist finally had a true God to protect them. And with the increase in his believers, Womians finally completed his transformation and obtained a new divine concept, the guardian god of the Northlands. As long as the master of this land still follows the principle of not going to war, I shall protect him forever. I bless him that he will never be conquered, bless him that he will. A guiding path of light descended. From now on, the people of the Mist's souls would belong to Womian's divine domain, and the brave warriors who sacrificed themselves for their people would become Valkyrie. No true god would be able to steal the people of the Mist's souls from Womian's hands. No. Why am I so certain? That's because, Roland, that boulder is too difficult to deal with. You guys hold him back for me. I have an even more important matter to attend to. Where were we? Right. I bless him that he will reach the pinnacle with victory, and bless him that he will enter the Valkyrie palace after his death. May the scales of justice forever stand above the Northlands. My voice resonated with the voice in the sky. After so many sacrifices, we had finally taken this step. I, the guardian god of law and the Northlands, Womians, swear to expel all invaders. Not satisfied? Come and fight. Chapter 182. The Protection of a True God? Mortals didn't use such things on the battlefield. Limited by the basic rules of the world, it was impossible for a god to directly interfere. The elves' forest guardian god? He had already used his life to show the consequences of breaking the rules. But for the brave warriors who fought to protect their tribe, this was more than enough. The mortal Mist King Roland announced their glory, while the heavenly Womians announced that their heroic deeds would be recognized by the world. Even if they died, even if they fell into the river Styx, As long as their glory existed, this was more than enough for the true warriors of the North. And for the beastmen, this was basically asking for their lives. Perhaps the protection of a god was illusory, but when it was truly proven, it would be fatal. What will he do? Will he let the God of Law's church participate in the battle? Or will he personally intervene and send down divine punishment? Especially since the beastmen's original guardian god, the war god, had already perished in the last holy war. Without any checks and balances, they were even more afraid of a true god's interference. It's no longer the time to hide. Lund, send your main force. Kagra, your blue-feathered harpy tribe and my blood-axe tribe are mixed together. Our warriors lack aerial cavalry and spellcasters to protect them. Hamar, Sastero, don't let your brave knight regret his actions on the edge of the battlefield. Even though they're dismounted, they're still our most elite warriors. Our city-climbing warriors lack the leadership and command of elite. The tribe leaders who were named all nodded silently. Although they were strong and powerful as they occupied the highest ranks of the Allied army, they had always been avoiding the fate of having their tribesmen serve as frontline cannon fodder. But when it came time to truly put their lives on the line, they would throw in all their blood. Get rid of him in 2 days. Sound the war drums, I'll personally go into battle. The blood-axe tribe leader slammed his fist on the conference table. The shattered sandbox of the city seemed to be announcing the city's fate. At this moment, this beastman king, who was more like a merchant than a king, finally displayed his beastman vigor. The heavy snow came and went from time to time, but the temperature never went above 0. This damned weather could freeze the exposed organs directly. The night had already darkened, but the number of beastmen surrounding Red Maple City's walls did not decrease. On the contrary, with the return of the Wolf King's army, the number of beastmen attacking the city increased once again. Among them, there were even more wolf riders, known for their agility and prowess in battle. Hundreds of large bonfires served as temporary torches and heating devices. When the orcs realized that there wasn't enough wood, they threw the precious books and art pieces they had plundered into the bonfires as if they were worthless firewood. Meanwhile, in the distant orc camp, the unique sounds of the orcs' rough singing and dancing and war drums could be heard. Damn orcs! They don't even care about us. In fact, this was the exact opposite of the angry humans. This proved that the beastmen had already seen the humans before them as brave warriors like themselves. They sacrificed their ancestors on the battlefield of honor to comfort the souls of the fallen warriors. At the same time, it also meant that they were sacrificing their tribesmen who were about to die in battle. In the eyes of the beastmen who worshipped the war god Horades, dying in the battlefield of honor wasn't an unacceptable ending. If they died in an epic battle, it would be a blessing from the war god. And so, they sang the war god's name loudly as they calmly met their deaths. They longed for a great battle that would please their ancestors, the Valkyrie. Of course, since Horades had already fallen in the last holy war, and the current war god Kalampas was a member of the human god system, the prayers of the beastmen would never be answered. Their prayers were more like longing and gratitude to their ancestors. They thanked fate for giving them a glorious battlefield and a chance to challenge their own fate. If we win this battle, we can return to the great plains of Bianlua, where the beastmen originated from. It's said that it's inconceivably beautiful. After this battle, I can go back home and get married. In their eyes, the battle was already nearing its end. As long as they got rid of these humans who were obstructing them, they would only be one step away from completing the great work of their ancestors. The first wave of charging beastmen finished making arrangements for their funeral and began to rush to the battlefield. After finishing their sacrifices, they believed that their souls would forever accompany their tribe. On the battlefield, they didn't fear any sacrifices. We admit that these northern humans are brave warriors. Cowards should die in shame. This will be a great battle where only one side can survive. Die without fighting. War drums and desolate horns continuously sounded from every corner of the city walls. Songs of praise for war were constantly being sung. This time, the beastmen had been attacking for more than 10 hours. Due to the obstruction of the city walls, the siege easily became a bloody and cruel meat grinder. Since there were only a few warriors on the front lines at the same time, under the attacks of the spellcasters and mage towers, this represented endless cannon fodder and sacrifices. It was already midnight, and the beastmen had more than 120,000 soldiers. The beastmen had long since surrounded this place. Even though the humans had the advantage in numbers and individual power, the humans had the city walls as their cover. This was still the most helpless meat grinder battlefield for the beastmen. The defenders of the city didn't have it easy either. Under the cover of the aerial cavalry and the charge of various gigantic battle beasts, there would be beastmen warriors successfully climbing up the city walls at every moment. Even if they were quickly thrown back down again, the human defenders' sacrifices were destined to be many times greater than the beastmen's. The first layer of the city walls had already fallen into chaos. An entire division would be devoured in the blink of an eye. The first layer of the city wall had already fallen into chaos. If a division went up there, it would be devoured in the blink of an eye. Finally, the first layer of the city walls, which had been constructed by earth mages using stone to mud and stone sculpting spells, began to shake. The beastmen army also suffered significant losses from the city defense equipment and the defenders. Finally, the first layer of the city walls, which had been constructed by earth mages using stone to mud and stone sculpting spells, began to shake. The beastmen army also suffered significant losses from the city defense equipment and the defenders. Die. Beastman butchers. A long sword glowing with silver light sliced through the beastman general's defenses, and the silver light pierced through his body and took his life. Rene unhesitatingly kicked him off the city walls, and the screaming beastman general finally met his end. Your Highness Rene! Knights, clear the city area and throw down all the beastman corpses. Pay attention to the archers. The next wave of attacks is coming. Hurry, hurry, hurry! Rene's tender voice had an irresistible majesty to it. The magical power of war to make people mature was always something to sigh at. After experiencing the tempering of this war and experiencing countless blood and sacrifices, the cruel burden and responsibility made Rene, who had originally been a recruit, mature. She was now a mature commander who could take charge of an area. Your Highness Rene, all the beastmen's mammoths have rushed out. The command center has ordered us to abandon the first layer of the city walls and retreat to the inner layer. Retreat? You're telling me to retreat? You actually dare to tell me to retreat? Look at this battle, look at those brave warriors who sacrificed themselves. We haven't even collected the corpses of our warriors yet, and you dare to tell me to retreat? The messenger was an old acquaintance of Rene. Even though Rene was right in front of him, as Einros's second-in-command, he knew that he couldn't retreat at this time. You think I want to retreat? I also want to F***king fight to the death against those beastmen. Our main army has suffered even worse losses. Our earth mages have already used up all their mana, and the city walls are already being destroyed. If this continues and the beastmen break through, it'll be a meaningless massacre. Retreating to the inner layer is the only solution. Alright, you can all retreat. I'll show you the confidence of the people of the mist. Timlad, is the train king ready yet? If you delay any longer, I'll chop off your head. Currently doing a full self-inspection. We'll be able to log in 5 minutes. But we can't fight for more than 10 minutes, or else we might self-destruct. Alright, Borealis, send me the Titan warriors from afar first. Let our allies hold on for a while longer. When the beastmen's mammoths charged forward again, the city walls were on the verge of collapsing. Countless beastmen swarmed up the city walls, and just as all the city walls were about to collapse, the Night Princess finally gave the final order. Donglon revealed his secret trump card. The gigantic airship started moving again, and the cabin door opened. The prototype Roland Titan warriors flew out together with the rocket. As experimental machines, they had completed their historical mission and were about to explode with their final glory on the battlefield. Boom. 5 Titan warriors landed among the beastmen on the city walls. The beastmen blankly stared at the gigantic beastmen in front of them. The tallest and strongest elephant beastmen only reached the Titan warriors' calves. Since they couldn't carry any heavy equipment, they were no threat to the Iron Giant. The berserk Iron Giants stomped on the beastmen with their feet and slapped them with their palms. These unexpected creatures from the underground finally revealed their true nature, merciless war machines. You beasts! This is all for my son. He's not even 10 years old yet. The enraged mecha crushed the beastmen in front of it. In the cabin, the enraged volunteer pilot struggled to operate the mecha. The pendant on his chest was a portrait of his family. But now, he was the only one left. He had also lost his left leg, and could only use this method to take revenge for his hometown. The red warning lights in the cockpit were flashing continuously. From the very beginning, this Titan mech had already reached its final moment. While overloading the mech gave it great combat power, it also turned it into a super explosive that could explode at any moment. Cham, hurry up and come out. It's about to explode. Hurry up and activate the rocket chair. He ignored the Borealis Command Center's words. He noticed a tall centaur wielding a giant halberd killing soldiers. This centaur was a monster that was more than 3 meters tall. With a single slash from its halberd, a large number of soldiers died. Hamar the butcher. I finally found you. Wasn't this the same butcher who had massacred his own hometown? The roaring mecha crushed all the beastmen in its way. Even though the mecha was covered in beastmen, even though someone was using a battle axe to attack the cockpit, Hamar didn't slow down at all. But, foolish piece of metal. Weak humans can only rely on such useless things. Every beastman tribe leader was at least at the legend rank. Hamar, who was famed for his outstanding combat power among the tribe leaders, wouldn't be easy to deal with. Hamar was even taller than the Titan warrior mecha when he jumped. Slash. The halberd smashed down, and a giant golden arc brought about death. Along with it, the cockpit and half of the mecha's body also exploded. The sound of an explosion came from behind him. He didn't even look at Hamar, intending to continue his slaughter. However, he never expected that the already collapsed mecha would suddenly reach out with its only remaining handle and grab onto Hamar. The proud centaur tribe leader angrily roared. In front of this terrifying brute force, even its metal arm began to tremble. Only the weak need to rely on such foolish external object. We beastmen have our own physical bodies, and that's enough for us to dominate the world. We're the high-level species that should occupy the center of the world. In the shattered cockpit, Cham, who was covered in blood, was still fiercely biting down on the control stick with his only remaining teeth. He smiled at the gigantic centaur tribe leader's angry roars and mocking laughter. That was because the red warning light had reached its final moment. The Roland Titan warrior's engine was on the verge of exploding. Is that so? Heh, then I'll show you the determination of a weak human. See you in heaven, Aisha. Nini. Daddy has taken revenge for you. Cham let go of his bloodied teeth and viciously smashed his chin against the red button. In the end, an explosive red light covered everything, and a mushroom cloud slowly rose up from the city wall. Impossible! These were the proud centaur warriors' final words. The weak humans had used their lives to prove their courage. At the very least, they wouldn't need to die alone. Lord Hamar has died in battle. The centaur tribe has begun to flee. Tribe leader Basoro has died in battle. The attack on the north gate had failed. All of the siege weapons had been destroyed, and reinforcements were unable to arrive. Lord Alothian has died in battle. The attack on the north gate to the south gate has failed. Military advisor 1 has died in battle. The south gate has been routed. To the tribe leader, who was still bathing his wounds, every piece of bad news was like a bolt from the blue. But what could they say? Were they supposed to say that their comrades were exaggerating, that they were strong on the outside but weak on the inside? Actually, it would be quite difficult for them to even leave the battlefield alive against the humans' furious counterattack. If that terrifying red mushroom cloud had exploded right next to them. Hadn't the powerful Hamar already shown the results? Hamar, what a pity. Treat his family well. After a while, Almont could only sigh and shake his head as he continued cleaning his weapons. Now wasn't the time to be sentimental. Who knew if he would be next? Cham, what a pity. Treat his family well. Does he have no family left? Then let's make rebuilding his home the highest priority. At the same time, Renee also sighed when she learned that only 2 out of the 5 pilots had returned, and that Cham hadn't even activated his rocket seat. Tim lad. Damn it, are you still not done yet? I'm going to shoot you out of here like a gnome cannon. It's coming. We definitely can't let the train king overheat. Otherwise, this explosion will be on our side. His energy source is at least 10 times that of a Roland Titan. The entire city wall will be destroyed. The floating battleship finally landed. The cabin door opened, and an even more terrifying war machine walked out. Just its appearance caused all the warriors to tremble in fear. Just what kind of monster is this? The people of Donglan have gone insane. Chapter 183. The rules of war dictated that on the battlefield, practicality was the number 1 priority. Appearances and whatnot were never a consideration. Although humanoid mechas were mighty and domineering, their attacks were relatively simple. Imitating human attacks was also easy to predict, and in order to maintain the balance necessary for walking upright, a large amount of resources and spare parts would be used on the balance of limbs. When the technology was still immature, this was undoubtedly a fatal waste. In that case, what kind of war machine was the most practical? It must have a lot of space to accommodate cannons, and it's best if there's a lot of individual body space to accommodate more weapon parts and members. Let's give up on the resource-wasting walking system. As long as it can kill people, crawling on the ground is acceptable. I think it's best if it has a lot of body parts, and if necessary, it can be disconnected and reassembled. Discarding replaced parts can still be used in battle. That way, our logistics capabilities can be directly upgraded. Because of the existence of spellcasters, the larger the war machine, the easier it is to become a target. Can't be too big, yes, and most importantly, it can't be too tall. After all the opinions were gathered, the deranged engineer completely gave up on the bottom line, and this terrifying war beast, the Train King Prototype 0, doubtlessly that was how Roland named it. The appearance of the assembled parts reminded him of a train as a means of transportation. Now, what appeared in front of the world was such a metal monster. It was a metal monster made of extended horse carriages connected together, and its metal legs, which were modeled after insect limbs, were firmly inserted into the ground. This metal monster that resembled a giant centipede attracted everyone's attention the moment it appeared. A train? Isn't that a centipede? Hermit's astonishment was exactly the same as Roland's. That's right, when this object was truly created, the original shape of the train transformed into something similar to a metal insect, a metal centipede that was baring its fangs and brandishing its claws. And so, after considering the situation of the future battlefield, the designer, who had long since lost his bottom line, was inspired to directly give up on the inconvenient wheels and choose mechanical blades that were more adaptable to the terrain. Each of its legs was a blade that could attack, and its entire body was filled with all kinds of killing machines. Hermit's surprise was quickly answered. When the giant centipede crawled over the city wall at high speed, the oil pipes on both sides of its body kept spewing flammable oil. Then, as the sparks fell, all the city walls in its path turned into a sea of fire. The sea of fire he created along the way caused the beastmen to howl in pain. When he arrived at the designated location, he stabbed his metal feet into the ground and transformed them into a new metal barrier. Only then did he begin to reveal his true appearance. All of the carriages were opened, and every carriage contained the newest model of gnome cannon. As a divine artifact of the Church of Multiple Turrets, Train King used his actions to show that having more turrets was power. Odd sequence. Fire all cannons. Boom. Boom. The entire battlefield outside the west gate turned into a sea of fire. As the bombs exploded, countless orcs were blasted away. But at this moment, the beastmen who were still on top of the city walls had already gotten close to Train King. They laughed viciously and angrily, intending to use blood and steel to teach these weak humans what true strength was. The beastmen were confident that as long as they could get close to Train King, the engineers operating the cannons would be no match for them at all. They would only need 15 minutes to dismantle this expensive toy. But how could Timlad, who was a Grandmaster Demon Beast engineer, possibly leave behind such an obvious flaw? Cannon activate. Blades parallel. In an instant, all of the carriage's legs stood up once again. However, their sharp tips transformed into deadly blades. And then, these blades began to furiously spin. That wasn't the end, even sequence, fire flamethrowers. This time, all the carriages in the odd-numbered sequence were opened. The high-powered flamethrowers were quite astonishing, and the beastmen's sweaty faces had already been waiting for a long time. Fire. Fire pillars for 20 seconds. The several dozen meter-long flamethrower corridor had already become a corridor of despair. Even if a mega-powerful individual tried to charge through the flames, the rotating blades would unhesitatingly follow up with another attack. Damned humans! At this moment, the beastmen, who were stuck between a rock and a hard place, only had two choices. They could either be stabbed into the blades or become roasted meat. Killing was only one of its uses. The incredibly long body of the carriage was the best barrier and wall. The exhausted beastmen finally had some breathing room. This moving steel wall acted as a barrier on the battlefield. All of the exhaust pipes began to spew out large amounts of steam in the gaps in the battlefield that had been cleared out. This Train King's energy consumption was far too high. In just a few short minutes, all of its components and engines were overheated. The engineers were pouring water on the overheated engines, urgently cooling them down. The beastmen discovered this temporary emptiness. Just as they were hesitating about charging forward again, what awaited them was an even more frightening despair. Muskets, muskets, get ready! The most despairing scene was right before their eyes. The engineers raised their muskets, and the magical swordsmen actually jumped onto the carriages of the Train King and began to prepare their magic. The flashing firebirds began to gather fireballs. Perhaps the fireballs weren't very powerful, but with several hundred fireballs exploding at the same time, who could possibly dodge them? Asterisk boom. Asterisk asterisk boom. Asterisk asterisk boom. Asterisk one fireball after another arced through the air, and one musket after another shot out fatal sparks. The firepower of the new generation left the beastmen in despair. That short distance of 20 meters was the difference between life and death. The regret of being just one step away accompanied them to their deaths. Fireballs exploded one after another, and the continuous explosions stole the attention of the beastmen. Large areas of no man's land were cleared out, and the mages, who were the kings of war, had an explosive increase in power. Finally, the beastmen tribe leaders were unable to restrain themselves any longer. Under tribe leader Kagra's leadership, a large number of harpies covered the castle walls like a dark cloud. Together with them was the dragon knight that had luckily escaped last time. The green dragon Osmonia and his wolf tribe's dragon knight Kakaji had once again made a comeback. The beastmen army was now going all out, using what little remaining of their aerial forces they had. Shoot down that dragon knight! If this beast of war had any weaknesses, apart from the fact that it couldn't move for too long, it would be that it was too focused on dealing with ground units and lacked the ability to deal with air units. Renée instantly saw through the harpies' weaknesses. They lacked strength, and most of their spears were made of wood. Even if they could pose a threat to humans, they would be of limited threat to the Train King, who had a body of steel. As for the ability to cast spells in the air, the harpies would enter a trance state required for casting spells while flapping their wings so that they wouldn't fall off? If they had such skills, why didn't they just directly become archmages? Only that Dragon Knight is a threat. Kill him! Currently, the Night Princess was no longer just the commander of the western castle walls. Although she hadn't been promoted many ranks due to her outstanding performance on the battlefield, her military achievements were far more effective than any military rank. She had long since become the commander of this area's defense. But at this moment, her orders received no response. That green dragon knight was far too cautious. He flew too high, and all arrows and magic were unable to reach him. According to the knight's past battle tactics, whenever the battle became tense, he would launch a surprise attack at a low altitude. The poisonous mist that the dragon spat out would be abnormally deadly. Perhaps it wouldn't have any significant impact on the battle, but it would definitely deal a heavy blow to the city's morale. And this time, his target was naturally Train King. Obviously, this time, he intended to use the harpies as cover and launch another surprise attack amidst the chaos. After several days of fighting, the human Griffin Knight had suffered heavy losses. Those that could fly had already taken off to fight. At this point in the war, what mattered more was willpower and confidence. Whoa! But this time, the Green Dragon Knight's surprise attack was intercepted. Lord Timir! That's right. The gigantic bone dragon suddenly flew out of the city and shot itself out like a cannonball. The green dragon was sent rolling in the air from the impact. But right after that, the bone dragon, which was covered in wounds, fell straight down. As the commander of the aerial cavalry, Timir and his dragon knight, who always took the lead, had suffered heavy injuries. It took all of their strength just to be able to fly. And while that Beastman Knight was still trying to regain his balance, the Grim Reaper had already come knocking on his door. The Night Princess was already standing behind him. As one of the few aerial cavalrymen with flying mounts, Renée wasn't confident that she could defeat the powerful Dragon Knight in a direct confrontation. However, seizing opportunities to launch surprise attacks was her forte. Die! There was no such thing as luck on the battlefield. The chaotic situation of the battle allowed the strong and the weak to turn the tables everywhere. Before the Dragon Knight Kakaki could even turn his head around, Renée's longsword had already slashed down. The flying head was still dripping blood in the air, and the expression of complete disbelief was still on his face. His furious eyes were still filled with shock. The powerful Dragon Knight Kakaki had fallen just like that. Whoa! Discovering through the contract that his master had died, the pain before his death was transmitted over. The young green dragon Osmonia howled in pain, but he would soon no longer be sad. Renée's hands were covered in blood as she raised the long spear on her back. The Dragon Slayer that she received from Longtu Basra gathered a green bloody glow on it. Then, she stabbed it into the green dragon's skull. Aowo! The green dragon screamed in pain as he flapped his wings weakly. The natural enemy, the Dragon Slayer, pierced deeper and deeper into the skull. He could only welcome the inevitable end of his life. As the dragon's blood splattered everywhere, Renée had also completed her own Dragon Slayer feat. The Dragon Slayer Renée, the Night Princess. In the eyes of the world, when the Northlands met with a calamity, just like countless other times in history, another young ruler stood up. The cheers of the soldiers on the battlefield allowed the young female knight to completely break away from her status as a pretty face in the eyes of the world. Now, her reputation as a night princess would truly come true. Renée jumped in midair, and Frigid Maw caught her on his flying horse. She couldn't believe her own eyes as she watched the falling green dragon. "Father, I did it. I'm no longer a useless pretty-face princess. I can protect my own people and the Mist Kingdom now." For some reason, Renée suddenly thought of a certain man who wasn't currently on the battlefield. If he knew, would he praise me or scold me for being reckless? I think that if it was His Highness Roland, he would probably scold you first, and then find a reason to reward you as if nothing had happened. But he probably wouldn't have the kind of reward you wanted. Frigid Maw's following words caused Renée's face to instantly redden. Only now did she remember the trouble of having a telepathic connection. "He's coming again, be careful." A bird that stood out had its own troubles. The other dragon knight ambushed Renée, and even though she was thousands of meters away, she could still feel his bone-piercing hatred. However, even Rain herself did not expect that when danger was right in front of her, the corners of her mouth would curl up into a smile. She licked her lips with her fragrant tongue. She was enjoying the thrill of life and death. She was enjoying this battlefield. However, her heart was filled with doubt. As the battle progressed, she mysteriously felt excited, and her mind became clearer. The beastman's dying screams made her feel joy from the bottom of her heart. It was as if she was born for battle, and the face-to-face slaughter was awakening her dormant talent. She loved this place. She loved hearing the screams of her enemies, and she loved seeing the flowing blood. That mysterious excitement made her feel like her entire body was burning up. If this could still be explained by the excitement of entering the battlefield for the first time, then the obvious increase in her strength was rather puzzling. Forget it, let's not think about it anymore. Anyway, it should be a good thing. That idiot over there, isn't the boiling oil ready yet? Throw it down and kill those beastmen. During the interval of the battle, the knights were exchanging their opinions excitedly, sighing that the princess was indeed a descendant of the mist. She had undergone such a huge change in the battle. In the eyes of some of the worried ones, the change that couldn't be seen by the naked eye was so obvious. The scarlet glow of blood flickered continuously in Renée's eyes. The souls of those who died in the battle had no possibility of returning to the cycle of reincarnation. They were absorbed into Renée's body amidst their sorrowful cries. As they continued to eat, the huge black wings that couldn't be seen by the naked eye grew larger and larger. In the shadows, a pair of eyes filled with worry was looking at her. The hesitation on the face was very obvious. Perhaps others couldn't see it, but the black wings couldn't be more obvious in her eyes. Are they also demonkin? Damn it. Roland, just as you expected, there are also demonkin on Renée's side. This is the worst possible outcome. Looking at this aura and the talent of soul devouring, they are at least direct descendants of a demon lord. The situation is quite obvious. Both the Mist descendants are descendants of the Abyss Prince Cavendish. Cavendish, what did you do? Far away in the labyrinth, I was furious after hearing this news. However, Valkyrie Cavendish shook her head innocently. What? I didn't do anything. I was just helping you kill people. Chapter 184. The biting cold northern winds blew across the land of the elves. The rapid change in the unnatural temperature difference caused the entire region's weather to fluctuate. When the cold current and the warm current converged, under a series of effects, stormy weather that had never been seen before began to strike the Elven Kingdom. The rain poured down, making it difficult to see. The usually dry and comfortable region was suddenly attacked by heavy rain, which was bound to cause a series of troubles. But in reality, this was only the beginning. And when the deadly cold took over this region, the storm transformed into a deadly hailstorm and snowstorm. After unnaturally distorting the natural climate for thousands of years, the entire Elven Kingdom suffered the cruelest revenge of nature. Unlike the other northern countries, the elves didn't have the experience or ability to resist the cold. They didn't even have the necessary heavy clothing and firewood reserves to resist the cold. Relying solely on magical flames would quickly drain the mage's magic power, which wasn't much. The hailstorm and snowstorm made this winter 100 times more difficult. The thinly dressed elves were about to face their cruelest test. If the elven kingdom remained as chaotic as it was now, and if they didn't receive timely help, it was likely that not more than 1/10 of the elves would pass this test. And now, the rulers had no time to fight against the snowstorm. On the increasingly cruel icy battlefield, an incredibly cruel elven civil war was underway. A prince was under house arrest. After killing 2 generals, the king of the Tassel Kingdom successfully took control of the main forces of the 4 kingdoms. Of course, it was impossible to deal with all the loose ends in such a hurry, and there would be endless trouble in the future. There's no point in thinking so much. If we can't win this battle, there won't be a future. Awareness was good, but reality was cruel. Still, this battle wasn't going to be easy. The moment the battle began, bad news kept arriving like snowflakes. The Moonblade Squadron was ambushed by the Dark Elves' Bloodblade Squadron. More than half of them were killed, and they've been forced out of the battlefield. Our Pegasus Knight and Hippogriphon Knight aren't a match for those black dragons at all. We need the support of high-level aerial knights. The cursed black-skinned elves should have been exiled for 10,000 years. They're all superior elves. Damn it, our average combat power has been suppressed. We need high-level mages. They're ignoring the magic of apprentice mages. Damned dark elf assassins. Archmage Malads and his students all died in battle, and the other 3 kingdoms' court mages refused to participate in the battle. We're being suppressed by the enemy's priests and mages in terms of spellcasters. We actually lost in terms of spellcasters. Tell those mages not to use low-level magic. Have they forgotten about the anti-magic skin of the Dark Elves? Morale, numbers, war preparations, war machinery, and high-level combat power were far inferior to the Dark Elves in every aspect. The exhausted Elf Alliance, who had marched back and forth for thousands of miles, encountered the Dark Elf army, who had been waiting patiently for them. The moment the battle began, they were completely suppressed. However, an even bigger problem followed closely behind. The 2nd Legion of San Lorenzo refuses to carry out your orders. They want to see their prince. The semi-god shaman Samama requested to meet with you. He's probably asking about the assassination attempt on their general. Your Majesty Adrian, would you agree to meet with him? Adrian's hasty emergency measures hadn't been completed yet, and rumors had already spread like wildfire. If it weren't for the fact that they were currently in a state of emergency, and if it weren't for the fact that they were facing the mortal enemies of their species, the armies of the 3 countries would have already begun to turn their guns on them. Why can't you all understand? Do you all think that I enjoy using such dirty methods? Do you think that I won't be hurt by Swanna's sacrifice? That's my precious only daughter. Why did I sacrifice so much for her? I did it for the entire elf tribe. Why can't you idiots understand? Why? His Highness Elf King Adrian was furiously venting his anger in his royal tent. He had already smashed all the decorations and porcelain in his tent, but after venting his anger, he could only blankly watch as the situation in front of him worsened even further. There was endless internal strife, and the elf army was pressuring his borders. He had been forced to the brink by both internal and external troubles, but, I didn't do anything wrong. I definitely didn't do anything wrong. It's all the fault of those idiots. Even now, he still believed that he hadn't done anything wrong. Suddenly, a trusted aide sent him a short letter. After skimming through it, Adrian's expression drastically changed. He paused for a moment, but then he suddenly laughed. If you're heartless, then I'll be unjust. I did it for the sake of the entire elf tribe. It's all your fault for not understanding me. So, don't blame me even if we reach the river Styx. Right, Roland, I've recently fallen in love with chess as well, so I've given you a small present. I hope you'll like it. Cavendish. When Eliza suddenly sent me this message, I was quite astonished. Apart from being astonished by the contents of this message, I was even more astonished by the source of this message. It was evident that Cavendish knew quite a bit about me through certain channels. Cavendish directly contacted your main body? Does he know that you're one of us? Is your side still safe? The Chaos faction doesn't have that many rules. More accurately speaking, apart from a few demon lords, everyone else isn't interested in the Holy War at all. They'll naturally be satisfied if they can go to the mortal plane and start a massacre. But if they're asked to carefully plot plots and distinguish between friend and foe, that'll be too difficult for those demon lords who only have muscles for brains. Right now, most demons are still busy fighting against their own kind. Relax, I'll be fine. In fact, since I recently completed a direct mission from the will of the Chaos Abyss, it's possible for me to level up even further. Since the Chaos faction was already a mass of chaos, it was only natural that there was no so-called order or organization. It was normal for the demon lords to have their own territories. Demons at the level of Earl and above would have their own territories. This was just as I expected. Otherwise, even though the Chaos main gods had twice the number of Order main gods, and their overall combat strength far surpassed Order main gods, the Chaos faction still maintained an abnormal balance of power. It was definitely true that the strong were the rulers. But since they were already strong, why would they obediently listen to orders and fight? For the Chaos faction, internal conflicts of interest were the true enemies. Since the Chaos faction hadn't come looking for Eliza yet, at the very least, she was safe. Even a demon prince wouldn't possibly start a war against a demon marchioness without making any preparations. Eliza's words helped me relax. But when I carefully thought about the contents of this message, I became even more confused. A small gift? What could it be? Since the demon prince personally intervened, and he even proudly showed off to me, then this must be quite a big deal. There shouldn't be many things left on the battlefield that can turn the situation around. Something must have happened over there. Elves? Red Maple City? Antune? Definder? The human Central Plains? There were far too many choices and possibilities, making it impossible for me to make a decision. However, someone was unable to watch this any longer. Roland! Stop fooling around. We can't last much longer here. Alright then, Adam was finally unable to watch this any longer. He angrily reminded me that I was currently in the middle of a bitter battle. At this moment, the gigantic obsidian statue had transformed into a heavily armored black scorpion. Its gigantic body was directly buried in the ground, and its single eye was glowing with a dark green viciousness. Its fatal poisonous stinger was still on the ground, searching for its prey. This guy is too ridiculous. Just how many more times can he transform? Fighting against Omdorokan was a never-ending nightmare. Every time I slightly got used to his fighting style, the moment I gained the upper hand, Omdorokan would immediately transform and start a new attack. A stone giant with a sword and shield combination, a stone eagle that could glide at high speed, a stone sword saint that could swiftly play with dozens of weapons, a stone guardian that was slow yet strong, and so on. All sorts of attacks were displayed. Omdorokan had basically reached the pinnacle of physical attack. Insignificant, short-lived species, I've experienced countless years and battles. I've seen countless powerful fighting styles. My special body structure allows me to imitate all sorts of inconceivable fighting styles. My physical body will never tire. No matter how much effort you put into it, you'll still fall before me in the end. Omdorokan's low, angry roar contained an indescribable emotion. He was quite annoyed that he couldn't defeat Omdorokan after so long. Relax, my dear mortal heroes. I can sense that the dimensional door is closing, and his elemental power is weakening. He won't be able to last much longer. My powerful mortal allies, victory is right before us. At the very least, I can drag all of you down with me. The two furious elemental gods fiercely fought against each other, but there were two completely opposite possibilities in front of us. However, I knew that the truth wasn't what Camdron had said, saying that the earth elemental god was about to die, nor was it what Amdaroken himself had said, saying that he would never be able to defeat Amdaroken. The closing of the dimensional door meant that all of Amdaroken's investments would be for naught. He was currently weakening, but as the oldest of the 4 elemental gods, he was far from reaching his limit. This was destined to be a long and drawn-out battle, and the slightest mistake could lead to his death. However, there were some things that couldn't be hidden. Every time Amdaroken transformed and suffered losses, he would lose the earth element that made up his body. The current him was no longer able to absorb elemental power from the dimensional door to replenish his body. He was destined to become weaker and weaker. Meanwhile, our side also suffered significant losses. Adam, who was the main meat shield, was heavily injured, while Valkyrie Cavendish and Roland had already returned. They hadn't returned naturally, but had dissipated due to our attacks. And the most ironic part was that Valkyrie Cavendish had been crushed by a giant rock in order to protect Valkyrie Roland, and then Valkyrie Roland had automatically been unsummoned. And right now, Roland was racking his brains for the sake of Cavendish. When you're annoyed, make others annoyed as well. Who knows, when you see others in trouble, your mood will naturally improve. Suddenly, something that someone had said popped up in my mind. So, I started to speak too. Amdaroken, are you really proud of your indefinite form? True experts all have their own paths. What is your path? Is it just to keep changing? Or should I call you the slime god, not the earth elemental god? You coward who only knows how to talk. I will definitely tear you to shreds. Aya, this reaction can only mean that you have a guilty conscience. Do you only know how to say such empty words? Right, your warrior monk's form is quite fierce. Just which master did you imitate? I wonder if you have the confidence to defeat that master. Could it be that you're imitating him because you can't defeat him? His single eye was filled with bone-piercing hatred, but he didn't reply. It was obvious that I had touched his sore spot, and so the stone scorpion attacked even more viciously. Hey, can you not add oil to the fire? I'm the one acting as a meat shield. Adam was far too useful as a meat shield. Even Camderon often used him to block attacks. At this moment, my leeching was coming to an end, and all the preparations were complete. Activate, Seal of the 4 Elements. The elements mutually reinforced and countered each other. This was the most basic rule of this world, and the most powerful seal in this world was probably the one that imitated the natural circulation of the element. As long as this seal was activated, the 4 elements would start circulating, and it would be like a real world with no exit. Since we were destined to face the elemental gods, how could we not make preparations? When Marguerite found this ancient seal from an ancient text, we met with a small problem. If we want to seal a powerful elemental or magical creature, do we need to find at least 3 elemental powers of the same level? Amdaroken is an elemental god, so where are we going to find 3 elemental gods? But to be honest, perhaps Amdaroken deserved to be unlucky. Coincidentally, we actually managed to find the 3 keys that we needed so quickly. Flame Sea Marchioness Seal of Fire. Eliza, who had obtained the divine power of the fire element, gave her origin power to me. Although she didn't have much fire origin power in her reserves, it was indeed fire origin power on the same level as Amdaroken's. Stonevilla Ocean Bottle. The ancient sea god Stonevilla was inconceivably powerful. Even the water elemental god was only his wife and follower god. Although she didn't have much divine power in her reserves, in terms of quality, she was still superior to Amdaroken's. But in the end, we met with some trouble. The power of the wind element was indeed difficult to find. Originally, we only intended to use Adam's Titan lightning to barely make do with it, but this time, we had an even better choice. Camderon, we're just waiting for you. Let's complete the seal of the 4 elements and send Amdaroken to eternal rest. Chapter 185. Countless magical runes on the ground lit up one by one. The sword energy carvings on the walls also followed predetermined trajectories. After the 2 elemental treasures were in place, the entire cave lit up. Hearing my shout, Cambion's first reaction wasn't to agree or sigh. His eyes, which were filled with lightning, stared right at me. The panic in his eyes was so obvious that I instantly understood what was going on. Relax, we're allies. How could I possibly seal you? Besides, in order to seal you, I'll need a god-level earth element ingredient. Where am I supposed to go find it? Camdron turned his head in that direction. His meaning was obvious. Wasn't Omdoroken in front of him a god-level earth element ingredient? Sealing 2 elemental gods at the same time? You're making things too difficult for me. If we were at such a level, we wouldn't need your help. Do you think we're foolish enough to need your help to seal you? That's completely illogical. Alright then, I tried everything I could to convince Camdron that this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, so he finally nodded and agreed. While we continued to slack off, the pitiful Adam was already being beaten up by the furious Omdoroken. No, it should be said that Omdoroken finally wanted to leave. Meanwhile, our job class meat shield, Adam, stuck close to him and harassed him like a ghost. Since things had already reached this point, how could I possibly let him leave? Actually, when all the magical runes in this room lit up, it was already too late for him to leave. When Camdron hesitated and prepared the final key, the thunderstorm transformed into a teardrop that dripped onto the ground. With a crisp drip, the entire world began to change. The powerful feeling of being in another world made everyone instinctively feel incredibly uncomfortable. When the 3 god-level materials resonated with each other, Immortal Orcan, who was unable to escape, would be at the center of the triangle. His elemental heart was resonating with the 3 materials, and together, they constructed a small elemental world that was constantly circulating. According to the principles of the sealing spell mentioned in the ancient scroll, this seal only borrowed the basic characteristics of the elements to construct the world. For the elemental life, it was their nature to construct matter. It was just like breathing instinct. There was no way to avoid it, or even refuse it. This was also the reason why Cambion was so afraid. If we wanted to use this opportunity to seal him, it wouldn't be completely impossible. At the very least, it wouldn't be wrong to make more preparations. I had also prepared a plan to seal him at the same time. Of course, there was no need to turn hostile now. If it weren't for his help, it would be impossible for us to stall Omdoroken for so long. However, scaring the wind elemental god would also be beneficial to our future cooperation. At the very least, he would think about the consequences before he betrayed us for benefits again. Camdron's losses? Who cared what he wanted to do? He deserved to be unlucky. It was his own fault for tailing me. Omdoroken, you finally have such a day. I've been waiting for this day. Let me watch you get sealed. But judging from his delighted laughter, I knew that I was obviously overthinking things. As long as Omdoroken could be defeated, Camdron would obviously be willing to pay any price. But at this moment, Omdoroken suddenly began laughing maniacally. You want to seal me? Dream on. Even if I die, I won't let you have a good time. That familiar maniacal laughter immediately reminded me of certain existences, such as gnomes that were forced to their limits by the town's security, gnomes that were willing to die for money, and gnomes that gambled with explosives. And so, the next second, I pulled Adam in front of me and hid behind Camdron. You're trying to screw me over again? Alright then, should I say that he was already used to being screwed over? Even though he was complaining, he didn't move at all, perfectly fulfilling his job requirement as a meat shield. Asterisk boom. Asterisk before he could finish his sentence, the rumbling explosion caused the entire labyrinth to collapse. The sandstorm that was kicked up blinded everyone's eyes, and the wind and rubble that were kicked up by the explosion caused Adam to scream in pain. I knew that you didn't have any good intentions. You're a professional at screwing over your teammates. Cough, I ignored that guy who was used to complaining and focused on the windstorm god before me. Is Amdaroken dead? Based on what you meet men say, his physical body and soul have both been destroyed, so he's indeed dead. But for an elemental god, that's probably just returning to the earth elemental plane. But this time, he self-destructed his physical body and killed himself. It'll be impossible for him to recover his power level without at least 100 or 200 years of rest. And when he makes a comeback, he'll be nothing. Camderon laughed maniacally as he transformed into human form, his expression filled with pride. Being able to kill his mortal enemy, any price he paid would be worth it. At the very least, he was now one step closer to the peak of the elemental plane. I nodded and didn't say anything else. I carefully put away the 4 god equipment materials that I had saved. 4. Yep, 4. Apart from the ocean bottle and the seal of fire, I also put away Camderon's tear of thunder and the earth-colored elemental heart that Amdaroken had left behind. Camderon was tempted as he looked at these small materials, but I waved them at him and pointed at the magic runes that were gradually dimming. My meaning was obvious. You're nothing. The spell formation is ready-made. Do you want to try it? Or, do you intend to self-destruct just like Amdaroken? All right, I could only think of these words in my heart. But judging from Camderon's expression that was getting colder and colder, my threat had undoubtedly been delivered. A traitor would never be trusted. If he could betray once for a certain benefit, he would naturally betray a second time for a greater benefit. From the very start, I had made preparations for him. All right, Lord Camderon, can you bring us out of here? But sometimes, even if there was a grudge between us, it was better not to shed all pretense of cordiality on the surface. In that case, as allies, wouldn't the heads of major countries, who were rumored to use destructive weapons to aim at each other's capitals, smile whenever they met? Of course, I'm never stingy with my allies. Come on up, my friend. Thus, Camderon, who had transformed into a storm, easily brought us out of the labyrinth. However, near the entrance of the labyrinth, we met Marguerite, who had been waiting for a long time. When she saw us coming out, she heaved a sigh of relief. Your Highness, Lord Marguerite was the one who teleported us out. It was a pity that we were unable to locate your coordinates, so we were unable to send reinforcements. But since you successfully came out as she said, then you should have already won, right? I nodded and took out the earth elemental heart. In an instant, the knight's cheers were deafening. Even though the crumbling of the earth elemental labyrinth foretold the fall of Amdaroken, when the boulder that had been pressing down on everyone's hearts was finally removed, everyone's taut heartstrings finally relaxed. Well done. Without you all closing the earth elemental door, it would have been impossible for us to win. When we return, I will reward you. However, my praise received a strange reaction. Everyone in front of me looked at each other, as if they wanted to say something, but no one replied even after a long while. In the end, it was Marguerite who spoke up. How could it be that easy to close the earth elemental door? If we weren't careful, the entire labyrinth would have been blown up into the sky or transferred to another world. We only isolated it for a short period of time, but this seems to be enough. Hearing this, I paused in surprise for a moment, before revealing a bitter smile. Amdaroken died such a pitiful death. If he had calmed down a bit, perhaps he would have seen through it. Forcefully summoning the elements was no longer difficult for him, and he wouldn't have ended up in such a state. Forget it, it's already over, so there's no need to think too much about it. In that case, should we go down again to close the earth elemental door? However, Marguerite smiled and shook her head. There's no need. The dimensional doors are maintained by Amdaroken's divine power. Since he's dead, it's only natural that the dimensional doors will collapse. I nodded. Just as I was about to introduce Camderon to everyone, the wind elemental god beat me to it. Human ally, let's have a proper discussion after everything is over. From a weak human insect to a tiny meat man, and then to a human ally, Even the way he referred to himself was constantly changing. From a certain standpoint, no matter if Camdron was the wind elemental god or the wind elemental god, he was indeed frighteningly realistic. However, since everything was going smoothly for us right now, and we had the absolute advantage, I no longer had to worry about what tricks he would play. Just as I heaved a sigh of relief, my ring vibrated, sending me the latest battle news. Roland, an incredibly powerful earthquake suddenly occurred. Red Maple City's walls have collapsed, and the entire line is in a state of emergency. Can you think of something? Hearing this urgent call for help and hearing the crying and shouting on the other side, I knew that the situation was dire. You want to seal me away? Dream on. Even if I die, I won't let you have a good time. For some reason, Omdaroken's crazed screams before his death still echoed in my ears. Obviously, this was his true revenge. Marguerite, you should have Red Maple City's coordinates, right? Can you teleport me there? It's enough to teleport only one person. Just as Omdaroken's physical body collapsed, a piece of rubble in a Mont Blood Axe tent suddenly transformed, and an incorporeal giant covered in starlight walked out. As he walked, the starlight on his physical body continuously dissipated. Camdron's judgment was correct. Omdaroken was already walking towards death. Right now, he was nothing more than the last remnant of his soul. From the very start, the Earth Elementals had been a Mont Blood Axe tribe's allies. That was why Omdaroken had cut off a portion of his own arm in order to deal with the upcoming battle. That portion of his physical body turned into rubble, and he gave it to the Earth Elementals as his final trump card. At the very end you can summon my power. Remember, only at the very end. Otherwise, I'll take out my anger on you first. At this moment, as Immortal Orcan watched his divine power continuously dissipate, he knew that he didn't have much time left. Damned humans! Even if I'm destined to die, I'll drag all of you down with me. Asterisk boom. Asterisk boom. Asterisk after a series of explosions, the nearby beastmen suffered heavy losses. Because of this, Omdaroken, who had once again self-destructed his physical body, was willing to risk everything in order to take his final revenge. Foolish humans, I, Omdaroken, shall make you tremble as you walk towards destruction. Riot, Earth, I am your master. Show me your final loyalty, and let those damned city walls turn into rubble and bricks under my wrath. And so, when Omdaroken lost his entire physical body and returned to the Earth elemental plane covered in injuries, his hibernation period had been extended to the point where he could directly wait for the next holy war. The powerful earthquake he brought about was destined to bring the most terrifying destruction. And this was only the beginning. Countless Earth elementals emerged from the ground. Their goal was to destroy the enemies of the Earth Elemental Master. Red Maple City's defensive line, emergency. Chapter 186. Fortress walls and castles were once the symbol of the Middle Ages in a certain world. However, due to the rise of modern weapons, they gradually declined and became the tears of the times. The bombardment of the organized air force, the long-range attack of the artillery, the large-scale destruction of strategic weapons, and the forceful breaking of the steel torrent could all render these immovable barriers meaningless. Therefore, in the relatively peaceful modern era, these magnificent wonders that had played a huge role in countless wars in history and played a significant strategic role had also changed from a military location to a tourist attraction open to the world. Times change. As technology improves and new species appear, the original iron laws of war will become useless. No matter how sturdy a fortress is, it will still become a tourist attraction in the end. That was what I had always been thinking. Perhaps due to the differences between the magical and technological civilizations, there wouldn't be identical tanks and bombers in this generation. However, a large number of high-level aerial knights would still be able to ignore city walls and throw destructive weapons. As the engineers' technology improved, it wouldn't be impossible for a magical civilization to create a steel army. As for strategic weapons of destruction, hadn't forbidden spells always existed? Although there were very few forbidden spell mages, and even fewer dared to use forbidden spells, it wasn't impossible for powerful and common magic spells to appear as magical civilization continued to develop. At the very least, I had come up with several insanely powerful weapons that could be used on the battlefield based on the creations of my previous world. For example, Undead Calamity Virus, Heavy Radiation Liquid Slimes, Fortress Continental Destroyer, Mutated Poison Gas Cough. As a pacifist, it would be best to seal those obviously anti-human and shameless things until the end of the world. Returning to the main topic, I came to a conclusion that was inconceivably different from the mainstream view based on my judgment. Future wars will also enter a new era without city walls. That was why, unlike the Slawir kingdom, which focused all of its resources on building fortress defenses, no matter if it was in the past or in Dawnlawn, I unhesitatingly gave up on the time-consuming and laborious construction of city walls. Instead, I focused all of my resources on new technologies, new troop types, and actual combat. Defensive warfare with solid city walls as the foundation is highly likely to be swept into the trash heap of history in this holy war. However, that time of change was definitely not now. Fortresses and castles seemed to be purely passive fortifications, but they were extremely important in the era of cold weapons. Whether it was against the surprise attacks of the nomadic cavalry or against the beasts that came hunting at night, they could play an irreplaceable role in the core of the strategy. Defending and attacking the city had become the standard procedure of countless wars. It was no longer just a defensive barrier in reality, but also a psychological fortress. The residents living in the city would feel safe and secure from the bottom of their hearts when they saw the towering city walls. Even though there was a new era of innovative sources of fire, it wasn't truly popularized. Furthermore, it wasn't that easy for humans to change their mindset. In the eyes of most people, the equation of losing a city was still there. At this time, Red Maple's line of defense was equivalent to the psychological support of the humans. If anything happened to him, it's all over. We have no hope, we are all going to die. The one who screamed out words of despair wasn't a useless coward. This general had just killed more than 10 beastmen in melee combat, and he didn't even have time to bandage his wounds. However, when he screamed, he sounded just like a useless deserter who was forced to serve as cannon fodder on the battlefield. Not all of the city walls had been destroyed in that earthquake. However, there were countless openings that allowed the beasts to freely enter the sheep pens to hunt. The city walls had already lost their purpose. The city walls are gone was equivalent to the war has already been lost. This was the iron rule in his heart, and the collapse of his psychological defenses caused this warrior to fall into despair. There were many warriors like him. Even the most resolute of warriors would first think that this war had already been lost. Fighting against the beastmen who had the advantage in numbers? Their individual strength and morale would be completely suppressed. This was suicidal from the very start. Never underestimate the experience and wisdom of the long-lived species. Omdorokan, who seemed like he wasn't good at thinking, originally had a cunning appearance. Even though he was involved in the game of chess, he had always been observing the overall situation. He didn't directly interfere, but he had always been trying his best to understand the situation of the war. Thus, when he was destined to fail, he ruthlessly stabbed a knife into the human's biggest weakness at this critical juncture. He always knew that once Red Maple City fell, it would be the human's most painful wound. If Red Maple City fell, there would be no more obstacles in the vast plains after it. This would inevitably cause the entire battlefield to lose balance, and the entire human allied army would fall into an avalanche of consecutive defeats. At that time, the beastmen could even turn around and encircle Antoon again, and he would naturally be able to take his revenge. Hurry up and run, the beastmen have entered the city. I can't accept this, we've already fought to this point. But fortunately, not everyone had already given up hope. Or, it could be said that a certain princess's foolishness was quite a headache, but her personality of never giving up until the very last moment was still quite likable. The fluttering battle flag hadn't fallen, and the people of the mist had already faced countless desperate situations. Even the massacre of the entire city didn't scare them, so what could they do if only the city walls were broken? Abandon the outer city walls and retreat to the inner city. The wounded go first, and those who can stand block those beasts for me. Angry roars that still carried a hint of childishness echoed in the sky above the city. The warriors began to realize their mistake, and finally, the confused warriors began to move. We've already experienced countless bloody battles. Now is not the time to give up. The crumbling outer city walls were immediately abandoned. Most of the residents were already in the inner city, and the ones that needed to be evacuated were mainly the wounded. As for the defending soldiers who had been crushed under the collapsed city walls, they didn't have the time to clean up the rubble. The more critical the moment, the more important the trump card was. Finally, the Donlon people threw out their final trump card. Great Judgment. The God Equipment Primal Codex was activated, and a silver holy light instantly enveloped the entire city. All beastmen who were guilty of invading would be subjected to multiple negative statuses, such as having their freedom restricted, incorporeal shackles on their feet, weapons locked, and so on. But unfortunately, before Womians became the guardian god of the Northlands, the Church of Law originally had no reason to interfere in this battle. Only Rene and a few other members of the Law Job class were present in Red Maple City, and the powerful buffs that increased their power levels didn't have much of an effect. But just the effect of restraining the beastmen was enough. In this crucial moment, every minute that the beastmen were delayed would allow more warriors to retreat to the inner city, and more warriors would be able to reorganize their defensive positions. Notify the Borealis to fire at full power, we need reinforcements. Overload the Train King and give these damned beastmen a present. In times of danger, the role of a pillar of support became even more apparent. She didn't need to have much wisdom or experience. As long as she was able to calm herself down and come up with countermeasures, it would be enough to calm everyone down. The chaos at the western gate began to be pacified. Under everyone's regretful gazes, the overloaded Train King was thrown off the city wall. Asterisk boom. Asterisk another mushroom cloud slowly rose up on the battlefield. The violent explosion even blew the city gate away, but the beastmen who intended to pass through were instantly turned into dust. The huge ditch created by the explosion could be used as a moat. At this moment, everyone was being taken away from the crumbling city wall by the floating airship. They were preparing to rebuild the defenses in the inner city. Finally, the crumbling city wall completely collapsed, and the fallen wall even crushed quite a few beastmen. On the floating airship, Renée was silently cursing as she looked at the ruins. Damned beastmen! I want your souls to forever struggle in pain in the river Styx. What did I say? What is the river Styx? If she could look in a mirror, Renée would probably be even more astonished. The current Renée had blood-red eyes, and the black, wing-shaped mist behind her was beginning to materialize, and behind her, an illusory black figure was laughing maniacally. "Ha, the seed has finally sprouted." Night had fallen, but the Mage Guild in Antoon was still bustling with activity. In the plaza in front of the Mage Tower, several hundred mages were busy. Countless magical runes were inscribed on the ground, and large amounts of precious resources were being consumed. The paint used was dragon's blood, which couldn't be bought with money. Precious magical goblets of fire were being used for illumination, and archmages were lying on the ground as they studied the rarely seen magical runes. "You're still not done? Do you think that ultra-long-distance accurate teleportation is easy? Let me tell you, this is no different from accurately opening a door to another dimension. If there's even the slightest difference, you'll be thrown into another dimension. Sit properly and stop shaking. I'm going to calculate your weight. The mages passing by kept covering their mouths as they snickered. It was no wonder that they were acting like this. My current appearance was bound to become a new humiliation. The cold wind kept blowing, but my entire body was trembling. I was only wearing a pair of underwear. Let me be clear, I wasn't infected by Shueti. Stop shaking. How am I supposed to measure your weight like this? Oh my, your weight is still over the limit. You're beyond my abilities. You still need to lose weight. Currently, my entire body was covered in strange runes drawn in dragon's blood. I was trembling on top of a large scale that was used to store magical materials. How was I supposed to lose weight? I hesitantly reached my hand downwards, but seeing that more and more people were gathering around me, as well as the ladies who were covering their eyes and peeking down at me, I couldn't bring myself to do so. You're still over the limit. Just a pair of underwear isn't enough. How about you shave off all your hair and eyebrows? Marguerite adjusted her eyeglasses as she coldly made the fatal decision. Shave off all my hair? For some reason, I thought of a bald egg. That bald, round head would be cool in the summer, and it could even reflect sunlight to keep warm in the winter. How nice. At night, I could even save on oil, and my blinding holy light secret technique would be twice as effective. Adam, stop giving me random psychological advice. If you want to reflect light, go do it yourself. Adam, who was beside me, was rolling on the ground in laughter. He was the only one who would say such unreliable things. Or, I should say that he was the only one who would be so bored. However, due to my various excuses, Marguerite's expression became colder and colder. She seemed to be rather displeased. Is there any other way? And I instantly felt my heart sink. Chopping off my arm to reduce the weight was indeed the only solution I had. After hesitating for a moment, I took out the Roland sacred sword and held it against my arm for quite a while. Finally, I tossed it to Adam. Adam, you do it. I'm afraid of pain. I closed my eyes and waited for quite a while. However, I only heard a hissing sound. When I opened my eyes, I saw that Roland and Harloise were exchanging strange expressions. Stop wasting time. We don't have much time. Be quick with your sword. I'll find a priest to reattach it. What are you laughing at? Hearing this, Adam immediately laughed to the point where he couldn't breathe. Meanwhile, Marguerite adjusted her eyeglasses again. Why do you want to chop off your arm? There's no need. Do you intend to install a hook and become a pirate captain? That weight? So you were joking. You can already teleport? No, I never joke in the domain of magic. Marguerite still had a serious expression as she spoke. The cold glint in her eyes made one's heart tremble. She was indeed being serious. Your current weight is indeed insufficient. However, when I said hand, I wanted you to take off the age ring on your finger. In an instant, I understood. The current me was overweight. It was impossible for me to be overweight when I was younger. Taking off the ring would be enough. Why didn't you say so earlier? You tricked me again. Hey, wait a moment, I still have something to say. Furious, I hurriedly took off the ring. However, before I could even complain, Marguerite's cane descended and the light of teleportation enveloped me. At this moment, I could only hurriedly pick up the Roland sacred sword and prepare myself. I could only helplessly accept the reality that I had been tricked. After I left, the square returned to silence. Adam suddenly spoke. Did you vent your anger? Of course. That bastard, he actually forgot about me again. He really isn't a good friend. The way he looks at a stranger is so irritating. Even the saint who always had a calm expression had times when she was filled with righteous indignation. However, right after that, Marguerite's expression suddenly turned gloomy and she laughed out loud. However, I can't completely blame him. Let bygones be bygones. Even if he forgets about the past, I can just add new memories. This time I should leave a deep impression on him. Adam shook his head helplessly and turned his attention to the south. That was where the final battle would determine the fate of the entire Northlands would take place. I don't know if Roland will be able to do it by himself. That side really isn't easy to deal with. He's not alone. Did you forget about Amelia and that cat? Why do you think they disappeared for so long? That brat Roland is inconceivably cautious. He already left behind several trump cards that no one knows about. Just as I expected, at this moment, in the market area of Red Maple City, a witch was making her final preparations for the battle. Oh my, I really suffered a huge loss this time. When the time comes, I'll ask Junior for compensation. Little babies, wake up, it's time to eat. Relax, the main food this time isn't the disgusting zombies. This time, let's play Plants vs. Beastmen. Chapter 187. It was already night. Snow covered the entire area, making the frozen ground even more unbearable. Snow blanketed the land. Even without the cover of the night, one could only see a few meters in front of them when they opened their eyes. No matter how strong a warrior was, he couldn't do anything when he couldn't see. And this wasn't even the deadliest factor on the battlefield. It's so cold. How many of us can survive this night? Even Chief Lord, who was as tough as an ice mountain in the eyes of his tribesmen, wasn't an emotionless man of steel. It was already cold enough in the north, and the temperature dropped by 10 degrees at night. Even the air they breathed felt like it would freeze in an instant. Even though the beastmen who could enter the battlefield were generally strong, they weren't men of steel. They still had to take care of the cold in the middle of a fierce battle. Their vision was pitch black, and they had to look for directions from horns and battle flags. They had to fight the most difficult street battles in the chaos. They might even mistake the knife-wielding assassins as their allies, but the heads they chopped off were their friends and family. According to the unwritten rules of the war in the north, both sides should have called a truce to avoid the tragic ending of winning the war with no one to celebrate. But now, time was life. Every second of hesitation meant countless lives were lost. Neither side called a truce. At this time, everyone wanted to throw in their last bit of strength. Only by completely crushing the opponent could they survive. Lord could imagine a beastman warrior finally defeating his opponent, but the blood at the window had already turned into a thin layer of blood. The loss of blood took away most of his stamina, and he moved slower and slower until he froze to death beside his opponent's corpse. Looking at the pitch-black alley in front of him, it was like a vicious beast from the abyss waiting for its prey with a wide-open mouth. Lord shuddered inexplicably. He had a bad feeling that he might not live to see the sun rise the next day. This wasn't a groundless fear. Lord's keen sixth sense had accompanied him through countless life and death situations. But this time, he didn't want to listen to his instincts. Don't let the other tribes look down on us, Claw Tribe. We can't fall behind. Take this city and completely destroy the north. The glory of the humans will belong to us. The god of war is protecting us. His Valkyrie palace will leave a place for our warriors. If we are destined to die here, then let us meet again at the feast of the Valkyrie palace. Even though he said something impossible, his warriors still responded to his summons. Silently taking a sip of the strong wine that could dispel the cold air, they stepped into the pitch-black battlefield with resolute gazes, stepping into the giant mouth of the abyss where they would never be able to return. There was no hesitation, no fear. In this war without justice, there was no holiness, no evil. Everyone was fighting for their own race, for more living space, for their race and their families to survive in this cruel holy war. The city walls had lost their meaning. Every moment, every place, there were warriors who were bleeding and fighting. Human lives had become worthless at this moment. They were all mortals with physical bodies. Even if they were gold-ranked war commanders, they could be killed by a shovel that suddenly popped out of a small bungalow. We've lost contact with the Cass tribe. 20 minutes ago, we also lost contact with Lord Kagma. The aerial knights are requesting for battle. This is their blood letter. Lord Lund is requesting for reinforcements. We've lost contact with 2 of his teams. He's met with obstacles. Many of his warriors are missing. We need more warriors to complete the encirclement. The Wolf King's advance is smooth. He's reached the predetermined area. However, he's lost more than 40% of his warriors. He still refuses to retreat. Hearing the bad news, Almont's eyes twitched. The tenacity of the humans had far exceeded his expectations. That damned snow had turned the battlefield into the cruelest meat grinder. Tell those aerial knights not to cause trouble at this time. They don't even know how they'll fall when they're in the air. Even if they die, they have to die with value. Reinforcements? Let the newly formed tribe take the place. The messenger hesitated for a moment. The words of doubt were already at the tip of his tongue, but he swallowed them in the end. The newly formed tribe? It was formed from the remaining tribes that had lost most of their people in the war. A group of wounded and defeated soldiers. They had lost their chief, their tribe name, and their totem. Thus they came together. Perhaps they weren't strong enough, but they were the seeds of the future. When the seeds had to be put into the pot to satisfy their hunger, it also showed the plight of the beastmen. However, military orders were like mountains. At this time, there was no room for hesitation. Everyone knew that the path of bravery would be the victor when enemies met on a narrow path. Whoever could grit their teeth and persevere to the end would be the new master of this land. Now, it was time to compete in perseverance and sacrifice. The beastmen had suffered such great losses. For the humans, this battle was even more difficult to fight. The chaotic battle without rules was a comprehensive test of individual strength. The human defenders who had lost the advantage of fortifications suffered a sharp increase. 1 to 2, 1 to 3, and even 1 to 10 local casualties. We've long since had nowhere to retreat. Behind us are the defenseless civilians. Losing Red Maple City is no different from losing the entire northern lands. We'll become the sinners of the entire human society. Our ancestors have been humiliated because of this. The humans had no reason to retreat. This was a battle to protect their homeland. There was no room for retreat. The snow would eventually stop, and the sky would eventually brighten. When that time came, no one knew how many people would survive. The ones with more survivors would naturally be the victors. However, this night wouldn't be so easy to pass. The nightmares in the shadows were stirring. In a small alley, a beastman soldier only left a cry of surprise before vanishing without a trace. On the other side, the same fate befell his companions. Amidst their cries of surprise, they were suddenly dragged into hell by a dark hand that reached out from underground. Shamans, destroy this city. As his subordinates disappeared one by one, Lord finally couldn't sit still. Under his command, the elemental shamans no longer cherished their dwindling mana. After communicating with the elements, a sky-covering thunderstorm and a massive earthquake were summoned, razing the entire city to the ground. The mastermind behind the disappearance of the Beastman soldiers was naturally exposed. Flowers? In front of him was a flower that the northern lands viewed as a rare luxury. Lord had taken the opportunity to study in the south. The familiar branches and colorful petals were exactly the same as he remembered, but this is too huge. Indeed, in front of him was a garden. However, the flowers in the garden were a little strange. Offensive spells that could destroy houses were useless against them. Among the flowers, there were many sunflowers that were growing more and more vigorously. They were as tall as 2 people, and the seemingly ordinary flower bed on the ground was actually 3 times the height of ordinary flowers. It was a beautiful scene of red flowers and green grass. The battle-hardened lord sucked in a breath of cold air. A strong sense of disharmony made him instinctively feel threatened. The sense of danger, like needles on his back, made him instinctively want to break into a run. Ah, isn't that the missing cartel? The flowers are eating him. Suddenly, the flowers turned in unison. It turned out that each flower had a bloody mouth, and that the fertilizer being chewed on was none other than their missing comrades. The petals only had a large mouth full of canine teeth. Although there were no eyes, everyone knew that they had locked on to them. It was the instinct of a predator meeting its natural enemy. "I'll cover you." The strange scene sent chills down everyone's spine. Lord immediately gave the order. But at the next moment, the pitiful screams of the beastmen could be heard. The wooden vines on the ground transformed into coiled snakes that instantly hung the beastmen up. At the same time, the sunflowers opened their mouths wide and began hunting. Tyrannical strike. The bellowing Bear King slammed the ground with all his might, his arms strong enough to shatter boulders. A violent gale began to tear the wooden vines apart, and the shock waves spread out. Saint Rank Mysteries destroyed everything in front of him, and when it all came to an end, all he could hear was the screams of his comrades. "Are you all right? Quick, this place is too creepy. We have to leave." He half knelt on the ground, gasping for breath, and saw the despair on the faces of his comrades. When he turned back, he finally understood what had been wrong all this time. The small mountain not far away was slowly closing up, and the place he stood was caved in. Looking closely, it wasn't a small mountain, but a terrifying bloody mouth. "We've been hanging around this monster's mouth all this time?" His final sigh was meaningless. The sky was already dark, and the mountainous man-eating Flower King finally closed its mouth. With a crisp crack, Bear King Lord, who was only one step away from becoming the Beastman sovereign, died prematurely. Humility of the 7 virtues. However, perhaps it should be called by another name, carnivorous flower field covered in blood. Since the worst possible outcome had arrived, the black cat that was destined to bring misfortune finally woke up from its deep slumber. "Ha, what a bunch of cute children. It's just that they need some time to spread out, thanks to their fresh blood. Without so much fertilizer, they definitely wouldn't have grown so well." Humility? Virtue? It would be inconceivable if the witches who gave everyone headaches were able to create something positive. Humility wasn't just a single plant. It was a flower field composed of countless types of carnivorous plants. Their only characteristic was that they were highly aggressive. From the start of this battle, Amelia had planted a seed in Red Maple City, and how much this seed would grow would depend on how much fresh blood and souls it would take to nurture it. Roland's pride Omar was doubtlessly the king of all armies. In response to Omar's army abilities, Amelia had created this carnivorous flower field, which was also part of the army. These carnivorous flowers' special digestive juices were capable of easily melting bones, and the soul grass was capable of devouring souls, making undead mages' soul-summoning spells useless. The nutrients obtained from this battle would create even higher-level carnivorous flowers. Finally, after the gigantic Earth Devourer appeared, the battle should have ended. Doubtlessly, this battle had given Amelia far too much nutrients for her humility. Even though she hadn't entered the cycle of using battle to fuel battle, there were already several Earth Devourers that had been catalyzed and activated. The dangerous flower field had long since been waiting for new prey to arrive. Lord, the Bear King, had many such encounters. "Oh my, it seems that after this battle, your ranking on the calamity rankings will rise again." "Humph, I won't be able to surpass Roland no matter how high I go. I'm far from being as insane, inhumane, and insane as he is." Heloise really wanted to comment on Amelia's behavior. Could Amelia not have such a regretful expression when saying such things? It was as if she was saying, "I'm not as good as him." Did Amelia really want to compare who was more inhumane and had no bottom line? "You're really comparing yourself to him in everything. Do you like him that much?" Who likes him? I hate him to death. When I obtain information on his techniques, I'm going to use him as fertilizer for my flowers. Whenever Roland was mentioned, the sly Amelia would become just like an elementary school student who had never been in love before. Heloise wanted to tease Amelia a bit more, but Amelia, who was so angry that she was stomping her feet, suddenly stopped and smiled towards the window. "What's the matter? I didn't expect to catch such a big fish. Still, those behemoths that have gone out of control are going to be a bit troublesome. I'll send 2 little devourers over. Yep, don't kill them. They'll probably be rare undead ingredient. Roland will definitely be delighted. Perhaps he'll even invite me to dissect them together. I really miss the old days." "All right then," Amelia smiled shyly at this thought, while Heloise didn't know how to vent her desire to comment on Amelia's behavior. However, Amelia's expression suddenly changed greatly as she exclaimed in astonishment. "My devourers 2 and 4 were instantly killed. This feeling. Nature magic's withering magic. It's those elves. Traitors would never be trusted. This was doubtlessly an ironclad rule on the battlefield. Since you could betray someone once, nobody could guarantee that you wouldn't betray someone a second time if you offered a higher price. No matter which world's history it was, traitors might obtain high statuses in the end, but they would never be truly trusted by the victors." A present from Cavendish? Just like Roland's letter, it was just another letter. Even the sender was Rose, but this time, it was signed by the Abyss Prince Cavendish. All right then, there was no need to elaborate on the contents of the letter. It was nothing more than something along the lines of, "We know all about your schemes. Didn't Roland only promise you the position of elf main god? Our price is even higher. Anyway, you haven't made your stance clear yet. If you return to the embrace of chaos, we'll let bygones be bygones, and I'll have those elf gods become your subordinates." Of course, there was also a bit of a threat at the end. It mentioned that Rose's divine realm was located in the bottomless abyss, and that the demon nobles might form a group to visit. Rose was doubtlessly the dark elf's ancestor and spiritual teacher. Loyalty and stupidity were synonymous among the dark elves. It was easy to imagine Rose's personality. Thus, Rose, who had already betrayed the elves once, betrayed them a second time without hesitation in the face of a higher price. Of course, this was only part of the reason. The deeper reason was that Rose wasn't satisfied with the divine title of Guardian God of the Northern Elves. She wanted the divine title of Guardian God of the North, and this had just fallen into Womian's hands. Thus, if she didn't chase the humans out of the north, she wouldn't be able to become the true master of this land. Thus, after obtaining victory in the elves' civil war, she unhesitatingly helped the beastmen in their hour of need. Perhaps it should be said that since the original goal of the alliance had been obtained, what she wanted even more was right in front of her. Thus, she directly turned hostile and snatched it away. Cavendish's letter only gave her a reason to strengthen her determination to betray them again. At this moment, Rose's new favorite, the high-level nature mage who killed the Devourer of Earth, was standing beside Almont and looking at everything in front of him with a sigh. "I didn't expect that we would still return here after such a long journey. It's just that last time, you were our ally and acted like a proper person. This time, you're our ally's dog, licking your bones and puffing your mouth." Almont Bloodaxe unceremoniously mocked the elven mage in front of him. He looked down on this cunning and untrustworthy man from the bottom of his heart, especially since he had betrayed his own tribe, even if he was once a king. Yes, this long-eared elven mage was indeed once a king, King Adrian of the Tassel Kingdom. But now, his skin had turned ash-black, and he was no longer a noble moon elf. Instead, he was a new species of fallen elf who had thrown himself into Rose's embrace. At this moment, the former elven king's face turned ashen as he faced the mocking laughter of the beastmen who he had looked down upon in the past. In the end, he turned around and left. "I didn't do anything wrong, I didn't do anything wrong, I did this for the continuation of my tribe, I didn't do anything wrong, I didn't do anything wrong." But unknowingly, his fingernails had already transformed into his own hands, and he didn't even realize that his hands were covered in blood. Chapter 188. The Seal of Unlimited Courage. It was a lousy name, but it left an important mark in history simply because it was Cavendish's sole imprint. As long as you firmly believe that you won't lose, you'll become stronger. Are you a hot-blooded main character? Also, what's with this name that sounds like it's a common imitation? Do you need me to think of a new name for you? No need. Countless precedents have proven that if you, Roland, come up with a name, you'll definitely become the greatest shame of your life. I'm not that stupid. That was his reply back then, but from a certain standpoint, I wasn't wrong. This was truly an ability that only a main character in a legendary story would have. Never giving up. As long as one didn't admit defeat, one would become stronger and stronger. When faced with endless hopeless situations, when fate forced one to repeatedly face an army by oneself, this was indeed the most suitable ability. And when this ability was grasped by an ordinary person, there was a limit to how much courage a person could possess. There would probably be a limit to how strong it could be, and the amplification of power would also be limited. But in the hands of Cavendish, who didn't know fear or difficulty, this was the strongest soul imprint in the world. Saint rank? A demon lord? Won't I die if my head is chopped off? As long as I die and feel pain, what's the difference? Cavendish, who was laughing maniacally on the battlefield, said so. Behind him, there was already a sea of blood and a mountain of corpses. In front of this insane god of slaughter, even the demons who didn't know what fear was were afraid. The beastmen who had the protection of the god of war were afraid. The human allied armies that were attacking the Mist Kingdom were also afraid. Legend rank beastmen? Behemoths? Won't they die if their heads are chopped off? As long as they bleed and feel pain, what's the difference between them and ordinary humans? Standing alone on top of the checkpoint, the young knight princess blocked the beastmen's charge by herself. Her silver armor was already stained with the enemy's blood. Countless beastmen corpses lay on the ground, but they were unable to advance even an inch. And next to her longsword was the corpse of the Wolf King. Not far away, the behemoth with its head separated from its body was even more inconceivable. Next, the furious princess knight stood tall with her sword in hand. The beastman warriors in front of her began to hesitate and retreat. 30 minutes ago, this seemingly weak girl had shouted such a thing. Countless beastman warriors had rushed up to her, only to be slaughtered one by one. Next, 20 minutes ago, the behemoth that caused the earthquake let out a frenzied battle roar and charged forward, intending to strangle the human in front of it to death. In the end, its throat was sliced open, and it died in agony. Next, 5 minutes ago, the pride of the werewolf race, the incomparably valiant Wolf King Sostero, had charged forward with his personal guards, but this time, he was killed in a single slash. Next, when the silver-armored female knight roared angrily with her sword, the brave beastmen finally retreated. Perhaps they weren't afraid of sacrificing themselves, but at least their sacrifices were meaningful. Our princess, the most powerful princess in the world. Long live the Night Princess. In Renee's eyes, her blood was boiling, and the world in front of her began to blur. The cheers behind her seemed to be a lifetime ago, and there was only one thought lingering in her mind. I want power, I need more power. She was demanding power from her own soul, a soul imprint. When the light of law of great judgment illuminated the entire city, the gold-rank Law Knight Renee was further strengthened by the forbidden spell. Normally, a legend who was forcefully promoted to this level shouldn't have been able to form a soul imprint. But not only did she successfully form one, it was an unimaginably powerful soul imprint, the seal of unlimited bravery. That's right, the soul imprint that Renee formed was exactly the same as Cavendish's soul imprint, no matter in name or characteristics. Theoretically speaking, this was completely impossible. A soul imprint was the summary of a person's knowledge and life experience, and it was the cornerstone for one's future growth. It was impossible for a soul imprint to be exactly the same, unless two people had the exact same life, the exact same personality, and the exact same soul. And not only did this strange thing that was theoretically impossible happen, There was an even stranger follow-up. Under normal circumstances, Great Judgment should have ended, and Renee's power level should have returned to its original state. But now, not only did Renee not return to the gold rank, she was actually continuously becoming stronger. She's definitely not an ordinary legend. I'm afraid that even a saint rank warrior wouldn't be a match for her. Both her combat experience and power level are so perfect. I didn't expect Princess Renee to have hidden her strength so deeply. Experience, strength, combat intelligence, special abilities, and basic attributes were the weakest components of a powerhouse's overall strength. Not only was his basic attributes skyrocketing, but his combat experience, battlefield intuition, and other things that could only be accumulated over time were also skyrocketing at an inconceivable rate. Oh, so this continuous sword swinging is the profound meaning of a sword saint. So aiming in the direction of the opponent's gaze and taking action first is the prediction that Brother Roland mentioned. This rate of growth had long surpassed the possibility of normal learning. It was as if this body had long since mastered all of this, but had forgotten about it. What it was doing now was only awakening the memories that were engraved in the body. Amidst the cheers, Eliza was hesitating. Perhaps others only thought that Renee had finally displayed her power, but how could Eliza not know just how much power Renee had? It was completely inexplicable for her to grow to such an extent in an instant. Wolf King Sustero, a werewolf warrior that's almost saint rank. A behemoth that's even more difficult to deal with than a dragon on the ground, but he was actually killed with a single blow. Eliza already had a guess. She was hesitating whether she should risk giving up this incarnation and kill Renee in order to make that existence's conspiracy go down the drain. Suddenly, as if sensing Eliza's thoughts, Renee glanced at Eliza. The mysterious killing intent in her eyes made one tremble, and there was only one explanation for those murky yellow eyes. This feeling, as expected of the demon prince. Her black wings had already materialized, and a black devil was laughing maniacally in the void. All the conditions had been met. As that will descended, Renee's main bodies will become more and more hazy. She felt dizzy and wanted to fall asleep. I absolutely have to protect this city. This is related to the safety of the entire Northlands. My body is getting hotter and hotter, but I feel more and more energetic. Right, I want more power, more. Do you want power? Do you want to make a comeback in a hopeless situation? Do you want to obtain the great power to destroy everything? Vaguely, a will came from the depths of her bloodline, and a familiar voice echoed in her ears. In a daze, Rain gave a response. Can I obtain power and become even stronger? Big Brother Roland always says that I'm stupid. Perhaps I don't have the talent to become strong. No, don't underestimate yourself. What flows in your bloodline is the power of the highest. You have the talent to become even stronger. No, I should say that you were born to stand at the peak of the world. As long as you sign a contract with me, you'll have unparalleled power. Forget it. Big Brother Roland said that if anyone asks to sign a contract, I should directly reject them. You can't listen to the salespeople. They're all a bunch of scammers trying to trick you into signing a contract. Besides, my current state is fine too, right? Even though her consciousness was hazy, her hazy response caused that voice to be at a loss for words. Then, that voice spoke up again, this time in a rather hurried and exasperated tone. As a descendant of the mist, can't you have some backbone? With power, you can have everything. You can chase away those damned beastmen, you can protect your own people, you can become a hero in the eyes of the people, you can control your own destiny with your own hands, you can obtain everything you want. Can I have Roland praise me? He always says that I'm stupid, but Renee isn't stupid at all. Instantly, that voice was at a loss for words again, and its following tone sounded a little helpless. Sure, Roland will praise you. I promise. All right, I'll sign the contract. Following the will, the bloodline became the strongest connection between the two souls. A mysterious connection was established between the two souls, and a tremendous will descended upon this world. Oh my, it really wasn't easy coming up here. Renee, no, Cavendish sighed for the first time since returning to this world. There were no coincidences in this world, only certainties. Many things that seemed like coincidences were actually meticulously prepared coincidences. After countless generations of inheritance, she ended up looking exactly the same as her ancestor? How could there be such a coincidence? From the very start, the person Renee resembled wasn't Roland, but Cavendish. That familiar face was the result of that existence in the chaos abyss manipulating her bloodline. From the very start, Renee was a spare body that Cavendish prepared for himself. From a certain standpoint, other than the difference in gender, this body was no different from when Cavendish was still a human. It was basically a magic version of a mutated clone, which was the most perfect way to carry his soul. The power of someone at the legend rank? This is much more useful than Fummel's body. The Abyss Prince was far too powerful. Just the descent of his will was enough to distort the world. Just a few minutes ago, his descent had completely destroyed Fummel's physical body. That was why Cavendish's physical body had to reach a certain standard in order to be able to freely move about in the mortal plane. With this soul imprint, I won't have to worry about combat strength, nor will I have to worry about my physical body collapsing from being overloaded. Reaching the legend rank and awakening an identical soul imprint was the core of all this preparation. An unlimited soul imprint would allow this physical body to rapidly grow and truly reach the standard of being able to carry a powerful will. From a certain standpoint, Roland's hard work had actually helped Cavendish's descent. If it wasn't for the system's rapid growth rate, Renee wouldn't have been able to reach the gold rank so quickly. Nor would she have been able to instantly reach the legend rank with the help of Great Judgment, fulfilling all the requirements for Cavendish's will to descend. At this moment, Renee devoured all the black mist around her. She stood up, and the space around her began to distort. When Renee opened her eyes, the entire world changed. The snow suddenly stopped, but countless dark clouds blocked out the bright moonlight. Thunder and lightning continued to whip the world, but the nearby snowy mountain suddenly began to tremble. Judging from the flames on the mountain peak, it seemed like it was about to become an active volcano again. The restless earth began to tremble. A new earthquake was brewing. Countless birds and beasts escaped from their hiding places. They were fleeing for their lives because they knew that Armageddon was upon them and that it would be impossible to escape. Just her existence was enough to change the world. Even if she was only a clone of her will, this was the power of a main god. At this moment, Cavendish suddenly unsheathed his sword, raised his head, and laughed at the assassin who was attacking him from above. "Roland, I told you that we would meet soon. You didn't expect this, did you?" Roland's sacred sword drew a silver arc in the air. The two silver swords viciously clashed against each other. The younger brother smiled, while the naked older brother angrily rebuked him. "Renee, I told you not to believe the salespeople's words. Those packages sound nice, but they're all bluffing. Look, even your voice has become a man's, and your body is still that of a woman's. It's so disgusting that you're neither a man nor a woman. If you want to be a man, just tell me. I have the secret potion of the spring of the drowned man. It's painless, harmless, and has no side effects. You'll see it in 1 second. All right then." Cavendish's smiling face immediately became awkward after hearing this completely unexpected answer. Chapter 189. It was as if time didn't leave any traces at all. It was as if fate had returned to its original point. 377 years later, in the territory of their former country, these two brothers who had been away from home for several hundred years were reunited once again. Unfortunately, I didn't have any intentions of reminiscing about the past. My long sword represented my will. Before the silver holy sword could even descend, Carwins waved his hand, and a berserk gale immediately blew me far away. The difference is too great. Even though I had long since anticipated the difference in power, it was still quite depressing to be sent flying so casually as if I was fanning myself. Although Carwin's physical body had only reached the level of legend, his soul imprint, which was like a cheat, was far too shameless. It allowed Carwins to wield power far beyond that of an incarnation, and the power output of a main god's incarnation, coupled with the most suitable physical body, was something that even a true god might not be able to deal with even if they risked their lives to descend into the mortal world. As for me, I had only just entered the silver rank. I had only forcefully increased my power by a large amount of fate points in order to deal with Omdoroken. I still needed a large amount of time to consolidate my power. Roland, do you still not understand that power is everything? The current you is just as pitifully weak as you were in the past. If I had my current power back then, I wouldn't have ended up like I did. Cavendish was quite proud of himself as he spoke. His boastful attitude and power were exactly the same as before. You're already so old. Stop being so chinibu. Although I was filled with dissatisfaction, I sheathed my Roland's sacred sword. The reason? Besides, I still had many questions that I wanted to ask. Based on my understanding of Roland, he would likely answer me directly if I asked. Is it really that fun to help another species destroy the Mist Kingdom again? This was doubtlessly a test, but Cavendish shrugged with an expression that said he didn't care. What does it have to do with me? It's not like I did it. Do you think that I'm the mastermind? You're overthinking things. Hearing that, even though I was slightly surprised, such a reply was within my expectations. Cavendish had never been one to lie. If he said that he didn't do it, then it was most likely true. The current 2 royal families are my descendants. 4 demons, bloodline descendants are rare treasures. Who knows, my next backup body will come from them. Why would I kill them for no reason? In fact, without my help, Donglan would have been destroyed countless times over. How is this possible? 2 years ago, when Donglan was about to be destroyed, the enemy had already attacked the capital, but they still managed to fight back. Do you think René can do it? Cavendish rolled his eyes, his face full of disdain. In a way, he was also very dissatisfied with the recent Mist descendant. Hearing that, I was speechless. I knew that Cavendish was referring to the time when the Beastmen attacked. At that time, the previous king was killed, and René urgently led the army. However, she displayed her prowess and chased the Beastmen for thousands of miles, winning the title of Night Princess. I asked the person who experienced it. René was indeed impressive. Even though there were no records of her personally taking action, she managed to sweep away the Beastmen's attack with her army's coordination and outstanding judgment. However, it was a pity that she seemed to have used up all of her talent. After that, her performance was average. After the incident, I also asked her about it. How did you win? Actually, I'm not too sure either. At that time, I felt that my mind was extremely clear, and ideas popped up one after another. Then, I followed them and won. Big brother Roland, don't you think that I have a lot of potential, a genius? Yeah, you have a lot of potential, a genius. At that time, other than nodding silently with a blank expression, what else could I do? But now, it seemed that the truth back then was completely different from what everyone knew. The truth was that Cavendish personally led her to victory through the guidance of her bloodline, and it was because of this that René became famous. And the demon prince wouldn't do anything that would make him lose money. Perhaps it was all for the sake of the physical body before him. Then, what about the Beastmen this time? They came south of their own volition to seize territory and reclaim their homeland. In their eyes, this is only natural, the long-cherished wish of their ancestors. Naturally, it has nothing to do with me. Elves? That's even less of a concern. You know that I'm allergic to those long-eared sissies. They're seeking their own deaths, so who else can they blame? Rose? Wasn't it just a little joke that I played on you? You wrote a letter asking her to betray you, and I wrote one to see if I could make her betray me again. I didn't expect that female spider to be so shameless. Sigh, she even caused me to lose quite a bit of money. TSK, I still underestimated those black-skinned B** stars. The Earth Elemental Plane's dimensional door? That's something I instructed my subordinates to do. It's also for my boss, the Chaos Abyss, to do some odd jobs. Count it as preparation for the future. Still, it doesn't have anything to do with the Mist Kingdom, so it doesn't matter if it succeeds or not. At any rate, the revival of the Earth Elemental Gods has already fulfilled the requirements of the will of the Chaos Abyss. I couldn't help but be rendered speechless. Cavendish was quite direct and told me everything. But, since he was being so honest, I didn't know what to say anymore. Alright, since it's rare for us to meet, how about we find a place to have a drink? As he said this, the Cavendish smiled mysteriously as he raised his glass. Not only did I become even angrier, we were fighting so hard here, but in this brat's eyes, it was as if we were just playing an uninteresting game. It didn't matter if he won or lost, as long as he was happy. This comparison naturally made me angry. Fine, as long as you answer my last question. What's going on with these descendants that are left on the surface? What exactly is your scheme? Scheme? Isn't that your favorite? If I want something, I'll directly take it. It's still too early for the elemental tide's density. Let's talk about proper business later. I'll plant a seed, and when it germinates, I'll be able to use my physical body to travel to the mortal plane. Besides, how would such a small skirmish have anything to do with me? I'm a chaos elemental god, so I won't interfere in such a low-level battle. Relax, I have no interest in any of the countries in Ike for the time being. I'll save the best wine for last. Perhaps we'll have to fight in the end, but it definitely won't be now. Carwin's words infuriated everyone. He was truly treating this as a joke. The Holy War had only just begun, so it was impossible for powerful existences to descend here. Carwin's words were somewhat reasonable, but his nonchalant attitude this time was actually quite infuriating. As for those descendants, isn't that quite normal? You're already so old, so it'll be strange if you're still a virgin without a woman. I think I said something wrong. Sorry, I didn't mean to. Cavendish's strange smile had no sincerity in his apology. He really knew how to provoke me. So what if you're a virgin? Virgins are pure and beautiful, so can't pure and kind virgins be allowed to exist? This is ugly discrimination, this is unreasonable prejudice, this is the most inhumane form of sexism. I strongly request that virgins and virgins be treated the same. There's no foundational difference between the two, so why is there such a huge difference in treatment? If it wasn't for the fact that I was trying my best to remain serious, I would probably be furious right now. After so many years, whenever I thought about how I looked exactly the same back in the day, with my status being slightly higher than mine and my handsomeness being slightly higher than mine, it turned out that I was slightly less popular with women. Fine, don't slap me in the face. I admit that there was a huge difference, but that didn't mean that what he said was true. A nearly 400-year-old virgin would definitely be quite strange. Cavendish shrugged. He probably understood his older brother's craziness better than anyone else. At this time, all I needed to do was ignore him. Without my financial support, that brat Charles wouldn't have been able to successfully establish his own country. From a certain standpoint, I'm more concerned about this than you are. The younger generation will have their own lives, so I don't intend to interfere too much. However, providing a physical body for me to descend into and allow me to freely wander around the mortal plane should be the price and obligation that they should pay. If Cavendish really had some other scheme apart from the fact that he wanted me to have fun, it was probably to harvest the seeds that I had already prepared. Ha! You're talking nonsense again. Leave Renee's physical body behind. I don't care about anything else. I finally found a reason to vent my displeasure, so I raised my sword and blocked him. Cavendish kept giving excuses, as if he had no interest in the mortal plane at all. However, how could I possibly allow a demon lord like him to do as he pleased in this world? With the current you? Cavendish pouted in disdain. He instantly saw through my current power level. Even if I just slashed at him, I probably wouldn't be able to injure him. How about adding me in? Eliza's voice sounded behind my head. The Flame Sea Marquise's right arm was coiled by a flame dragon, while her left arm was covered in frost. The current Eliza had already released a portion of her seal the moment Roland appeared, and was prepared to risk her life at any moment. Marquise Eliza? Hey, don't be so serious, I'm really just here for sightseeing. If you were to go all out, I might not be able to keep this physical body of mine, and I would just have to return to the Chaos Abyss, but the descendants of the mist would come to an end. Don't worry, if the descendants of the mist are gone, I will try my best to give birth to a few more. My ideal family is 1 son and 2 daughters. Dear, do you think that 3 children are enough? If not, I can consider having a few more. Eliza, who was smiling sweetly, continued to release her seal while losing her moral integrity. One side of her eyes was a red ruby while the other side turned into the icy blue of the deep sea. At this moment, when the seal had reached its limit, Eliza was prepared to destroy everything around her in one strike. In her heart, the demon Prince Cavendish in front of her was too dangerous and a huge threat to Roland. Thus, even if she had to risk the destruction of her physical body, she would use her full strength to bring him back to the Chaos Abyss. However, I stopped her because I had a better choice on hand. You see this sword, right? Do you know what it's used for? If you know what's good for you, then obediently throw down your weapon and surrender. Summon Valkyrie? Limiting the Mist royalty. Even if you summon the first Mist King, I wouldn't be afraid. Wait, are you planning to summon that person? At the mention of that king, even the fearless Carwins had a panicked expression on his face. Yes, the one I want to summon is that ancient king from 400 years ago. He is destined to be your nemesis. In front of his great power, you, Cavendish, are just a weak child. He is also your nemesis. Stop it, you are causing both of us to suffer. In the end, there will only be no winner. I want both of us to suffer. So what if we die together? As long as you aren't having a good time, it's enough. Now die, all popular men should die. Summon of the king. An invisible roulette spun in the air. Even though it was a random summon and waiting for the heroic souls to respond, I had a premonition that the ones who would respond to the summon would be 2 people. Because this was the reason why the Roland sacred sword had to be awakened in advance. Descendant of the mist, Bartholod. Perhaps he isn't a powerful king. Among the ancestors, his martial arts and strategies are only average. However, Cavendish, he is definitely your nemesis because I am your father, I am your father. Yes, the bearded middle-aged man in a black cloak is Cavendish and I's biological father. He is also the only existence capable of disciplining Cavendish. Cavendish, what are you doing? Why do you have breasts and curves? Have you become neither a man nor a woman? At that moment, Cavendish's face was filled with embarrassment. This reaction, why does it feel so familiar? Should I say, as expected of father and son? From the very start, my focus and sharp observation skills were used wrongly. But at this moment I, who was secretly laughing, was also implicated. Roland, where are your clothes? Since when did you learn to run naked? How many times have I said that as a crown prince, etiquette and teachings are more important than anything else? Look at you, you even learned to tattoo. What are those scribbles on your body? At this moment I remembered that I was still naked. No wonder when the cold wind blew, it felt so cold down there. Roland, I already told you, you're trying to take me down with you. Once the old man starts lecturing, he won't stop for less than 2 hours. So what if I'm happy? Alright then, looking at my nostalgic father's endless lecturing, I actually had a headache as well. But apart from lowering my head and enduring, what else could I do? In the next moment, smoke suddenly rose, and Carwins had already disappeared without a trace. Without a doubt, he had already escaped. Honestly, now that the old man is out, he's no longer in the mood. I'm going to fulfill my contract first, and then I'll catch up with you. And at this moment, I once again shot myself in the foot. I was left behind to face the angry father alone. But from a certain standpoint, my strategic goal had been achieved. In front of my father, Cavendish would definitely restrain himself. And at this moment, on the Borealis's magical map, the symbol representing Rene instantly rushed out of the city. Oh my, you want to get Roland to praise you? Then if you want to do that, you really are a troublesome junior. Chapter 190. The weak are prey to the strong and the strong survive. This was probably the foundational difference between the goddess of order Astrea and the goddess of chaos Cynthia. Astrea believed that individual strength wasn't the most important. The weak and the strong should rely on each other and make up for each other's deficiencies under the gods' rules. That was the most perfect form of society. For Cynthia, having children compete with each other, allowing the strongest existence to survive, and providing the best resources to the children with the most potential was the most perfect world. The difference in ideals finally caused the two sides to break up. However, this also caused the two sides' creations to develop in completely different directions. For example, the Order faction's human society. At the very least, humans weren't all that different from each other when they were born. Everyone couldn't possibly live without society. Even kings couldn't live without farmers. And if they really had to compare who was stronger, perhaps even the venerated emperor might not be able to defeat a farmer who fought with all his might. If humans were unable to represent true order, then angels, who were top-level creatures of order, should be able to. Their future jobs were decided at birth. All of their lives would follow their predetermined path to serve the community. Although they seemed perfect, they actually lacked flexibility. Without the unknown, there would be no respect for the future. Even angels, who generally lacked emotions, had many problems. Otherwise, fallen angels wouldn't exist in the lower planes. Meanwhile, the Chaos faction was a completely different matter. Demons killed and devoured each other. Low-level demons followed the undisguised rules of the jungle. As long as one's power level reached a certain level, they would be able to obtain the corresponding status. In this world where everyone was trying to climb up, perhaps your boss wouldn't be as smart as you, but he would definitely be better at fighting than you. The weak should die and the strong should obtain everything. If I'm not living a good life, that's because I'm not strong enough. It's enough that I'm living happily. Why think so much? Perhaps that was all that most demons had in their heads. This was also why other intelligent creatures said that demons were idiots with muscles in their heads. However, that wasn't actually the case. High-level demons generally had memories from 2 lives. Their accumulated experience brought them sufficient knowledge and experience. It wasn't that they didn't have brains. They were just too lazy to use their brains. After all, there weren't many species that could defeat them with their muscles. Idiot. Perhaps I can't win against you in a verbal argument, but I can destroy you personally. Whenever someone tried to reason with a demon, that demon would use its own method to do so. It was likely that even if you were decapitated, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference. From a certain standpoint, Cavendish, who had always been immature, was indeed quite compatible with the Chaos faction. Fallen demons weren't brainwashed. It was likely that Cavendish's personality from the past was still the same. He would conveniently help his descendants establish their own country simply because he found it pleasing to the eye. And if the Mist Kingdom was destroyed again in the future, that would only be in accordance with the law of survival of the fittest. He would probably shrug his shoulders and say something like, "How regretful," before turning around and forgetting everything. Last time, he was probably because the seed had sprouted and he. Cavendish to him. Beastman. Of beastmen, beastmen of B. Right. And faction beast. Chaos main god. Good. Of beast off creation, good. Beast off. Beast off chaos of chaos. After thinking through all this, I actually relaxed. After all, a main god casually strolling around in front of me would have far too great of an impact on the overall battle situation. As long as Carwin still cared about their past relationship, at the very least, he wouldn't stand on the other side. The old man's appearance added another lock to the situation. After all, as long as they weren't brainwashed and controlled, not every prince would be crazy enough to kill his father and destroy his country. In most cases, no matter how naughty a child was, even if he had the ability to overturn the heavens, he would still instinctively fear his strict father who had accumulated his authority for many years. Roland, did you hear what I said? What are you thinking about right now? You've disgraced our ancestors, your knight's etiquette and royal upbringing. Also, you're clearly the older brother. Didn't I ask you to discipline your younger brother? Look at what you've done. When Cavendish changed his sex, I didn't discuss it with you. Why didn't you stop him? All right then, when Carwins decided to run away without any sense of loyalty, all of my angry rebukes landed on my head. This nagging that had been delayed for more than 300 years made me nostalgic, but I also didn't know what to do. Damn it, when the old man starts scolding someone, he won't listen to explanations at all. That bastard Cavendish. He actually left me to suffer by myself. While Roland was enjoying the love from his elders, Renée had already arrived outside the city. She was about to fulfill her promise. How much do I have to do in order to receive Roland's praise? From a certain standpoint, promises that weren't set were the most difficult to fulfill. As a demon, Cavendish could indeed go back on his word. There were already countless souls who had lost everything due to making deals with existences from the lower planes. But as an ancestor, he still felt bad for deceiving his own descendant. Not to mention, Cavendish was intending to rent this place for a long period of time. In that case, it was necessary to maintain a good relationship with the landlord. Then, I'll pay a little as room fees. I've decided. You're the one, Rose. This is also my main mission, to take care of those idiots who don't know any better. But even if I don't say it, Roland should have guessed it. From a certain standpoint, time had indeed left its mark on Cavendish. At the very least, in the past, Cavendish wouldn't have been so scheming. He wasn't lying. He really did want to come to the mortal world for a stroll, but he didn't tell the whole truth. He just wanted to take a stroll and complete a small mission. True gods also had their own rules. The gods wouldn't directly participate in the mortal world's battles. This was a requirement of the world's endurance, as well as an unspoken rule to prevent the true gods from directly destroying everything in a holy war. And during the holy war, if the true gods interfered too early, or even directly descended, it would directly cause the war to escalate and the situation to spiral out of control. From a certain standpoint, if it wasn't for the elemental god Omdoroken's participation in the war, Rose's ambush wouldn't have occurred, and true gods wouldn't have fallen so quickly. Without a doubt, both the forest guardian god and the spider queen had obviously violated the rules. This was like a fight between two kindergartners. The loser invited his primary school older brother to fight, while the other suffered a loss and invited his middle school older cousin. Then, both sides continued to invite people to fight, and the fight escalated. In the end, it became a battle of life and death between the two families. Perhaps the final battle will happen in the end, but it won't be decided now. Naughty children who don't follow the rules will be hung up and beaten. If the parents of that family had appeared earlier and discovered that their child was being unreasonable, they would have given their child a slap. Perhaps this would have stopped the cycle. And right now, Cavendish was the slap. At the very least, on the surface, Rose was still a part of the Chaos faction. Even if someone wanted to slap her, it wouldn't be the Order faction's turn. Oh my, I'm so angry this time. It would seem that just a slap isn't enough. If Rose's betrayal wasn't punished, perhaps the next traitor would be born very soon. And not only did her second betrayal not earn her the forgiveness of the will of the Chaos Abyss, it even caused the Order faction to angrily give up on protecting her. I've seen plenty of fence-sitters and fence-sitters, but I've never seen anyone jump back and forth from the very beginning. Rose, do you think the main gods on both sides are blind or dead? You stood out too early, so consider yourself unlucky. Originally, that idiot elf god's crime of descending without permission was greater than yours, but he's already dead. That's why I'm using you as an example to others. Of course, Rose was doubtlessly the greatest threat to the Northlanders and the Mist Kingdom. It was unknown if some personal grudges and desires were mixed in with her official duties. A meteor streaked across the sky. When this meteor landed, the Spider Queen, who was preparing to steal the Northland's guardian god's divine concept, was destined to meet misfortune. Right, it's rare for us to be here, and it's still early. Let's find a place to kill some time. I'm already sick of succubi and half-blood demons, so why don't we find something new to have fun with? Beautiful and slender female elves and cute and healthy half-blood beastwomen. Beauties, I'm coming. Cough, my bad, let's do it again. Beauties, I'm coming. Cough. Perhaps before Cavendish made up his mind to get down to business, Rose would still be able to act arrogantly for a period of time. By the way, after this series of events, it seemed that a certain princess's reputation as the Lily Princess was destined to become more and more popular. As night began to fall, the pitch-black beasts began their final banquet. This land had been bled enough, and everything was coming to an end. In the snowy Northlands, a strange team was currently advancing in the snow even though it was still snowing heavily. Even though they were all elves, they were split into two groups. The dark-skinned elves at the back were arrogant, while the grayish-black elves at the front had depressed expressions. Greyblood elves were the new name for these grayish-black elves. These 30,000-plus elves had confused expressions, as if they were walking corpses in a dream. After they joined a new master under the leadership of their king, that new master unhesitatingly sent them out to attack the current master of the Northlands. Are we still going to fight to the death against the humans? After circling one more time, the Greyblood elves returned to their original location. But as Almont said, previously, you were our equal allies, but now you're truly nothing more than dogs. If Rose was a traitor who had lost the trust of both factions because she had repeatedly betrayed them twice, then these Greyblood elves didn't even know how many times they had betrayed them. Betrayed their human allies and the Order faction? Yes, they had been from the very beginning. Betrayed the elven gods' expectations? That was the moment they abandoned the Northland's battlefield and urgently returned to their homeland. Betrayed all the Northland's elves? Their disgusting grayish-black skin was the best evidence. When they betrayed the Northland's elves on the battlefield, the disbelief and hatred of the betrayed Northland's elves were still deeply etched in their memories. And now, they once again betrayed their own elves who were suffering from calamity to participate in a battle that was meaningless to them regardless of whether they won or lost. That was why their faces were filled with fatigue, and they were tormented by guilt and pain with every step they took. It was no wonder that they were so exhausted. Warriors who had lost their beliefs and those they were protecting? How were they any different from walking corpses? Suddenly, a familiar song drifted over. It was a song that the Tassel Kingdom would play during every year-end celebration. It was the Tassel Kingdom's homecoming, and it symbolized the end of the year, as well as the reunion of the tribe. Djd, Kasu Ad Asda. Distant relatives, where exactly have you gone? We miss you in our homeland. Fre del D Cad? Are the ancient trees at home still green? That familiar lake and spring scenery always reminds me of my childhood. Back then, the sky was so blue. Back then, the elves had a civil war, and the flames of war never stopped. In order to find a place for her elves to live in, the legendary moon elf bard Tassel traveled through countless mountains, rivers, and oceans. After experiencing countless hardships, she finally chose a territory in the Northlands. Here, she signed a contract with the forest's guardian god, Clairlatin. Then, she happily embarked on a journey back home. Unfortunately, the journey back home was just as long as the journey here. Tassel, who was physically and mentally exhausted, was unable to return home in the end. She collapsed on the way back. Fortunately, the news was brought back by her messenger pigeon. In the end, her elves fulfilled the promise she made with her and transformed the northern mountain range into an elven paradise. Finally, in order to commemorate this legendary bard, the elves rewrote the lyrics of the song she had composed when she was homecoming, creating a classic homecoming song. In the past, during the annual celebrations, the princess would sing this song for everyone, and they would sing in chorus to celebrate the hard-won beauty of today's life. Da jd ad. Dal data 80. My family, I've finally found the home of my dreams. Our new home is in the Northlands. And now, that familiar song was echoing in the mountain range. This song was about home and memories, and it evoked the Greyblood elves' pain that had been suppressed in their hearts. The last time they heard this song, their loved ones who had reunited with them yesterday were still there. After all, every family had lost a few loved ones in this series of calamities. That song. It's exactly the same. Impossible. The soft whimpers finally turned into cries. Some people recognized the familiar voice of the singer, but that person was probably already dead. Your Highness Swana. No, it's impossible. The sharp-eyed scouts had already discovered the truth. There was a figure singing on the mountain range, and judging from the translucent figure that was faintly discernible, it was the legendary Banshee. The elves' faces instantly paled. The ironclad truth was right in front of them, and they instantly understood many things. Kill her! Amidst the cries and cries, the dark elf general's angry roar was extremely eye-catching, and his order was carried out. Countless enchanted arrows were nocked, and in the next instant, that fatal rain of swords would fatally destroy that lonely figure. No, don't. Finally, some of the Greyblood elves couldn't take it anymore and started arguing with the dark elves, trying to snatch those fatal enchanted silver arrows. But it was too late. The dark elf marksman had already mercilessly shot out a rain of arrows. Just as the newborn Banshee was about to die, a miraculous scene suddenly occurred. A flaming phoenix flew across the sky, and all the arrows were burned to ashes. Several magic spells were also blocked by its flaming wings, and when the phoenix landed, it transformed into a female general wielding a flaming divine sword. Behind that cliff, countless figures appeared. It was the familiar silhouette of an army, and on the surface, it was an elite battle group from the underworld. Although I didn't plant this tree, and I didn't open this mountain, it's still impossible to pass through here, even if you intend to pay the toll, the red-haired girl said. The red-haired young lady said. Although her words were a little confusing, none of the dark elves dared to refute her. After all, this was the great figure who had the highest possibility of unifying the underground world, Phoenix Annihilate. Another familiar voice caused the Grey Elves to tremble in shock. Perhaps some shocking tragedies were about to be exposed to the light of day. My brethren, you've been deceived. My death, that sudden declaration of war, it's all a scheme of an evil schemer. Chapter 191. No matter how long the night was, it would eventually pass. After winter came spring, when all living things would recover. But sometimes, the dawn after a long night would bring despair instead of hope. The world that was covered in snow wasn't always so beautiful. Sometimes, it would even make the corpses that froze to death in the long night seem even more frightening. When the first glimmer of dawn disappeared, the people who had been fighting in the dark for half the night discovered that this difficult night had come to an end. But those who were able to see the first glimmer of dawn were the lucky ones who were favored by fate. The Beastmen army furiously increased their numbers without caring about their losses. The inner city had already fallen, and all the human defenders had retreated to the third and final line of defense. This was a temporary defensive structure made of sandbags and earthen walls. This was also the city's final lifeline. The catapults outside the city had already stopped firing. It was impossible for them to accurately shoot from such a long distance. But now that visibility and the snow had stopped, the Beastmen's aerial knights could once again soar into the blue sky. It seemed that the Beastmen had already secured victory, but the current Beastman King Almont Bloodaxe didn't seem happy at all that victory was within his grasp. Instead, his face was filled with fatigue. More than 70% of our warriors were killed, and countless more were heavily injured. Only 2 of the great tribe leaders returned, and both of them were heavily injured. Lord Hamar died in the previous attack on the city. Now Lord One, Wolf King Sustero, and Lord Lund have all died in battle. Lord Kagoma is also missing, and he's probably... Bad news after bad news caused Almont to hesitate even more, but nobody could blame him. That was because the bandage on his right arm that had been chopped off at the shoulder was still leaking blood. Almont, who had lost an arm, was also heavily injured. As the great tribe leader of the allied tribes, he didn't have any obligation to avoid battle. The reason why he was able to survive was not only because of his outstanding personal combat strength, but also because he was sufficiently lucky. No matter what generation it was, cruel coastal battles were always the most fatal and dangerous. Even legend-rank warriors could suddenly die in chaotic battles. A sudden hidden rock or arrow could cause a saint-rank mage to collapse. The pitch-black night and the heavy snow made all this chaos even worse. We finally made it to daybreak. Almont sighed, but the survivors nodded in agreement. In a night fight, the unlucky ones would be killed by a stray bullet, while the lucky ones would be able to see their opponent and fall under a flurry of swords. As for the cunning and scheming Fox clan chief Wen, he was a classic example of unlucky people. He had been hit by a stray bullet from his own catapult, and 2 of his personal guards had died along with him. The scene was too horrible to look at. In fact, the orcs had unknowingly committed a great taboo in sieging a city, and that was never force your opponent into a corner. The other world did not have the right to surround the enemy and attack them at the same time. It gave the enemy a chance to escape, and it was also a buffer to prevent himself from being forced to die with the enemy. That night, the heavy snow and the besieging orcs blocked all the escape routes. The humans had nowhere to retreat to. They did not even have the chance to escape. Even a cornered dog would jump over a wall. How could those well-trained soldiers just sit back and watch their deaths be meaningless? If we can't escape death in the end, then we should at least fall down like a warrior, and at least drag one of our opponents down with us. The Allied army that had been forced to their limits exploded with astonishing combat strength. The fear of losing their city finally transformed into hatred for their mortal enemy. Their boldness to die together with the Beastmen, along with the most important geographical advantage in urban warfare, caused the ratio of casualties on both sides to change. The Beastmen suffered heavy losses. Meanwhile, Amelia's death garden continued to create death traps one after another. The human warriors that suddenly attacked from the houses were able to kill at least one of them. Bearman Lund wasn't the first, nor would he be the last. Meanwhile, the Beastmen's reinforcements had long since stopped. Now that the battle had entered the chaotic darkness of the night, their crude siege weapons had become weapons of mass destruction that didn't differentiate between friend and foe. No matter which generation it was, being mistakenly killed by one's own allies would be the most unacceptable way to die. Large-scale sorcery and tactical magic? With a visibility range of less than 10 meters, using these spells would have a 50-50 chance of killing both allies and the enemy. What was even worse was the silent and deadly cold. In this kind of damned weather where even a drop of water would turn into ice, the damage to one's clothing would be fatal, not to mention a wound. The extreme cold numbed the warrior's sense of pain. Small wounds that were easily overlooked in the snow wouldn't become infected, but the loss of blood and stamina would be the most fatal. If these wounds weren't discovered and treated in time, there would be far too many who would suddenly collapse while walking. While the Beastmen had forced the northern human allied army to the brink, the Beastmen had also forced themselves to the brink. The long list of the Beastmen's dead was incredibly shocking. It could be said that the Beastmen had suffered heavy casualties, and every family was in mourning. More than 70% of the Beastmen tribes would need to reorganize after the war. Just their current losses were enough to announce that the Beastmen's ambition to return to the Central Plains had failed. Even if they won in the end, they would need a long time to recuperate. But if Almont and the Beastmen were given a choice, even if they knew beforehand that this was an unacceptable loss, they would probably still make the same decision. Victory is right before our eyes. Take them down, and we'll become the new masters of the Northlands. When the crucial point of victory had appeared, how could the Beastmen let it go? But if this strategic goal of conquering the Northlands was placed 3 months ago, the Beastmen would probably be mocked for their lack of ambition and courage. After all, at that time, the Beastmen only wanted to return to their ancestral land and fight their way to San Antonio. Unknowingly, the harsh reality hit the Beastmen in the head. Their current strategic goal was to conquer the entire Northlands. The Beastmen now no longer had the ambition to conquer all the human countries. Just the seemingly weak northern countries and the reinforcements from San Antonio had forced them to this point. They had already lost the courage to challenge the human super-empires. Of course, there were still some discrepancies on this point. After this battle, the other countries would probably re-evaluate the combat prowess of the northern lands, especially the astonishing combat prowess that the East Mist communal country displayed in this battle. Perhaps, even the harshest military critic wouldn't put the label of a weak country on its head. Knight Princess Renée, the new generation of magical swordsmen called the Four Elemental Swordcasters, the gigantic self-destructing war puppets called Roland Titan, the floating airship Borealis, the battlefield harvester Train King, and so on. All these new concepts and weapons would definitely allow the Mist Kingdom to rise again in the Northlands. Military strength also represented the right to speak in foreign affairs and politics. With the strength displayed in this battle, it was possible that Roland's Mist Alliance, would become a reality. And on another level, when the news of the veteran leader Immortalorc being forced to the brink in his own territory spread, the familiar name of Roland Mist would definitely attract new attention after being silent for more than 100 years. Of course, the prerequisite was that they could survive this current crisis. The Beastmen are here again. I exhaled a white mist as I shook my holy sword, causing the blood to fall off. This indestructible sword was now clean once more. For the Northland's human allied armies, which had already endured a bitter night of battle, neither the sky nor the snow stopping were good news. This meant that the Beastmen could reorganize themselves, and those damned aerial cavalry and siege equipment could be reactivated. Perhaps they would be able to take a breather for a period of time, but the final battle would end with the complete annihilation of one side. Middle-sized catapults that could move were slowly pushed into the city. The bloodied elite soldiers bandaged their wounds and watched everything with high vigilance. Even the wind caused the tattered curtains to flutter, causing these veterans who had survived the bloody night to throw their javelins. At the same time, the commander of the allied armies, Black Bear Einro, was right behind me. Or perhaps I should say that he was lying not far behind me. The Beastmen didn't only know how to charge head-on. The cat-human assassin had found the command center, and even though he was rescued in time, he was lucky enough to survive. The one-eyed general was now completely blind. He had been stabbed 3 times in the right side of his abdomen, and he was so heavily injured that he couldn't even get up. But fortunately, he didn't need to command anymore. All he had to do was struggle to shout out a single word: "Defend! Defend! We have no way out." If we want to survive, we have to kill all these beasts. Defend. Behind us are the injured, the widows, the elderly, and the young. Defend. If we lose this battle, our country isn't even ready for war yet, and they will lose their land. Our families will be dragged into the endless flames of war. Yes, defend. At this point in the battle, there was no need for any strategies or arrangements. All they needed to do was carry out their will. Defend. One street was lost. The next street was already prepared with a new defense line. A temporary defense wall was flattened. The next wall was already built. An entire squadron was massacred, and a gap appeared in the defense line. The old man and woman, who had just been commoners, picked up the weapons on the ground and silently repaired the gap. Perhaps humanity's end and defeat will eventually come, but the beastmen, do you want to take over this city and open up a path to the northern countries? Let the blood of the brave warriors here run out first. The young men with tense expressions didn't say anything else, but they used their actions to tell the arrogant beastmen what the northerners were and what the people of the mist were. Winter is here, but aren't we northerners used to winter long ago? No matter how cold it is, it's not that difficult. We just need to endure it, hug each other for warmth, play with the dogs, and spring will come, right? Even though he couldn't see it anymore, Einro still laughed in disdain. He was referring to the dogs when he said, play with the dogs, and judging from the warrior's laughter, it was obvious. When the sun rose slightly higher, judging from the footsteps and the sound of catapults on the street corner, the final moment had arrived. At this moment, even I was out of options. All of my chips had been placed on the table. And Toon was too far away, so I couldn't count on him. I had sent Anne's army to stop the Dark Elves, and Shilua's reinforcements had been out of my control from the very start. I had also used all of my new weapons of war. I had played all of my cards. That damned Embark. If it wasn't for him, Embark's final attack had indeed hit our vitals. If Red Maple City fell here, I wouldn't be able to turn the situation around. Sigh, if only this battle could drag on for another 10 days. Unfortunately, there were no ifs on the battlefield. Countless famous generals had died on the battlefield because of a single moment's difference. Accidents and misfortune would always accompany the losers. Heaven and hell were often just a tiny bit apart. I propped up my holy sword and stood up. Ever since René's unexpected departure, I had temporarily taken over the position of a mid-level commander. But at this point, I had even used the other 2 summoning abilities of my holy sword, but there was nothing I could do. My diligence and self-control are all dead, damned moon elves. Only their natural control abilities are so disgusting. The green-haired witch was in a rather sorry state. Her mana had been completely used up in this battle. 2 of the 7 virtues that she treasured so much, of which there were only 3, had died in battle. It would seem that she was at her limits. The Moon Elves were originally the Elven Empire's priestess species. They were skilled at communicating with the gods and true gods, borrowing the power of the gods to use all sorts of powerful divine art. The original guardian god of the Moon Elves was the guardian god of the forest. The nature priests who had controlled the divine power of the forest for thousands of years were the most skilled at sowing seeds and controlling the forest. It was their natural duty to eliminate all unnatural and abnormal plants. That was why Amelia had met her natural enemy when her opponent was a nature priest like Adrian. She was at a great disadvantage. Senior Amelia. Her usually immaculate hair was now messy, and her eyes were bloodshot and bloodshot. She had become even scarier now that she hadn't slept all night. If the beastmen attack again, you can leave. I refuse to believe that you don't have a way to escape. Of course, I can leave whenever I want. You? Don't tell me that you're planning on dying together with the city like a foolish knight. Me? I'm the undying Roland. How could I possibly die here? I'm the super willful witch of the Tempest mood. How could I possibly listen to your commands? Now that my temper has returned, I'm going to go all out against those beastmen. Heh. You think I'm useless just because I don't have a pet? I'll show you what a melee mage is like. Looking at it from this angle, Amelia, who had her sleeves rolled up, seemed like a shrewish senior from back in the day. I shook my head. There were some words that I didn't say out loud. Eliza? Heloise's preparations are complete, but she wanted me to tell you something. Don't use that unless it's absolutely necessary. Otherwise, all your hard work will be in vain. I still had my final trump card prepared. And right now, the only thing that could turn the tables in such a hopeless situation was the ultimate forbidden spell of undead magic, undead calamity. However, as long as I used this ultimate forbidden spell, which was forbidden by every country in the continent, all the corpses in the area would transform into mindless low-level undead. This was completely different from when I summoned the undead back in the day. Back then, the undead that responded to my summons were the undead who were unwilling to remain silent, while the ones controlled by undead calamity were the mindless undead who were permanently bloodthirsty. This was a forceful and permanent enslavement, as well as a blasphemy against the corpses of the warriors. Perhaps the warriors by my side would immediately turn their weapons against me, an evil undead mage. If I used undead calamity, the saying that undead don't represent evil would instantly become useless. It was likely that the Mist Alliance's plan would be completely ruined, and the Donlon Principality would likely be viewed as a new axis of evil, which would cause them to be isolated from the outside world. At that time, we would be the ones to win the war and lose all the benefit. Anything is better than being completely destroyed. It'll be hopeless if this little bit of flesh and blood is destroyed. However, Eliza adjusted her eyeglasses upon hearing my words. She didn't say anything, but judging from her lowered eyelids, she seemed rather displeased and listless. What's the matter? Why didn't you ask me if I could escape? Why didn't you try to persuade me to escape? All right then, Eliza indignantly spat out her resentment. She was quite cute when she was angry. Of course, she didn't want to escape by herself. She was just unhappy that she didn't receive the care that she deserved. At the very least, in name, Roland was still Eliza's boyfriend. I shook my head. Based on my understanding of Eliza, she didn't need to say such useless things to begin with. What's there to ask? Didn't you say that you would always follow me, no matter if it was in the river Styx or hell? What, are you going back on your word? Right after I said that, the dark clouds transformed into a clear sky. She smiled very sweetly. No way, I'll never regret it. Then let's fight to the death together. I'll go find you in the river Styx. Such a strange conversation didn't seem logical at all, but it was highly likely that it was going to happen. Perhaps the love lives of undying individuals were just so strange. I secretly broke into a cold sweat as I watched the gloomy sky turn bright again. I glanced at Amelia, who had suddenly become displeased, and felt Elisa's gaze on my back. I suddenly realized that my luck was finally turning for the better? Did I really say something like I was a winner in life? But why is it that every time I'm about to die, I'll suddenly turn for the better? Am I the type of unlucky person who's destined to shout after this battle, I'll go home and get married, or after I leave the battlefield, I'll say goodbye to XX before I die? Hey, I don't want to die at my own funeral. That's why beautiful women are tearing up and confessing to me, actually, I like you. However, the familiar sound of footsteps not far away interrupted my thoughts. The final battle had finally arrived. Surprisingly, the person leading the group wasn't a beastman, but rather a familiar figure. His slender figure and light footsteps could only belong to an elf. Atrian. That's right. Even though he had transformed into a grey-blood elf, even though time had left its mark on his body, I would never forget his familiar face. After all, the person who had dealt me a fatal blow back in the day was this arrogant elven racist. But right now, this disciple of mine didn't seem to be in a good state. Two axe-wielding beastmen were dragging him forward, constantly nagging as if they wanted to do something. Persuade him to surrender? Is there any point in saying such things at a time like this? Atrian's guesses seemed reasonable, but there would only be one ruler in the Northlands. Since there was already a deep grudge, the only way to cleanse it would be with the blood of the enemy. Persuading him to surrender would be impossible from the very start. However, judging from how Atrian's mouth was slowly moving, I was astonished. Hurry, kill him! Pitch-black divine light had already descended from the sky. That forbidden ritual had directly entered its final phase. The beastmen were saying, "Prove your worth, elf." Only 2 words came out of Adrian's mouth. God's descent. Chapter 192. What were gods? There was actually no way to answer this question. After all, in this colorful world, there were far too many existences with the title of God. Not only that, they had truly reached the level of God in everyone's hearts, but in reality, they couldn't be considered the same. Elemental gods, true gods of order, evil gods of chaos, primordial gods, and so on. They were all completely different in terms of composition, abilities, nature, and so on. Nobody could give a complete definition of them. Even the demon lords in the chaos abyss could call themselves gods and recruit believers to bestow divine arts upon them. In reality, there were quite a few devils and demons who did this. Their believers usually hid in the shadows, and those dangerous devil worshippers were often on various wanted lists. However, the Order gods, as the victors of the last holy war, actually had the most complete information. As for Rose, she was exiled from the Order faction. From a certain standpoint, she was quite similar to an ordinary Order true god. She had her own divine kingdom and oracle, and she would even protect the Dark Elves. In order to understand these undying existences, one had to first understand the difference between the Order true gods and other gods. The Order true gods were usually directly connected to a certain divine concept, and their existence represented the concept itself. First of all, one shouldn't treat the gods as individual entities. While they were indeed high above and eternally immortal, they were still subject to many restrictions. They created their own divine domains, but their true bodies were also trapped within their divine domains. They merged with their divine concepts to become incredibly powerful, but they were also merged with concepts and lost their sense of self. The Order faction was still the Order faction. Their god system was like a large tree with lush branches and leaves. All the gods were a part of the tree, and each divine concept and god had various kinds of connections. Low god, middle god, high god, main god. This was only an extremely rough classification, but from a certain standpoint, this was the current situation of the world tree. If the main gods were the top of the god system, then the powerful gods were their branches that continued downwards, and the countless souls and power of belief were the nourishment for the world tree. In a way, Rose was still the same elven god of order from back then. She wanted to create her own world tree and make herself a true elven main god. Her first step was to rebuild the dark elven divine system, and the god of poison, Felix, was obviously the first. And when they became a part of the world tree and lost part of themselves, from a certain point of view, these true gods should not be treated as individual beings. The closest existence to their current situation was the collective concept of a country. One god and one divine kingdom. They were a combination of concepts and collective interests. While they obtained the authority of system administrators, they were also tightly bound by the responsibilities of administrators. Leave his own divine kingdom? That was a great taboo, and as long as they did not leave the divine kingdom, it was impossible for the gods to truly die. If the incarnation they sent out was killed, it would only be a loss of divine power. In the modern world, where the elemental tide wasn't very active, there was a limit to the strength of an incarnation. A semi-god incarnation might be able to deal with most situations, but against a veteran semi-god who had experienced hundreds of battles, the incarnation would often become a test subject for the other party to research divine power. In order to allow their guardian deities to be truly useful, the ancient elf empire had once led the world in this area. God's descent. Using a special body, the true god would adjust his or her own soul wavelength to match the true god's soul wavelength. Then, the true god would give up control over his or her physical body, allowing the true god's will to perfectly merge into his or her physical body, allowing the true god's will to be incredibly powerful. If the true god's descent was successful, the true god's will would perfectly descend. Will was power and the soul was power. If the true god's descent was more than 90% complete, then in this state where the soul and body were one, the true god's descent would be far more powerful than his or her incarnation. His or her combat strength would be close to that of the true god's main body. It should be mentioned that God's descent was a double-edged sword. The soul was the other side of power. It was the pure embodiment of will and power. If the true God's descent died, it was highly likely that the true God's divine power would be greatly damaged. And if the true God himself was only a low god, it was highly likely that the true God would directly die. Clairlatin, the forest guardian deity, was indeed incredibly powerful when he or she descended on his semi-god level descendant. In fact, he or she even forced Rose to descend on her true body. But it was precisely because of this that Clairlatin's descent died in battle that Clairlatin himself fell. The requirements for a god's descent were incredibly strict, especially the requirements for the true god's descent. It was only natural that the true god's descent would be as close to the true god as possible. It would be even better if the true god's bloodline and soul wavelengths were similar. From a certain standpoint, Cavendish's descent was the Chaos Abyss's version of a god's descent. At the very least, the principles were quite similar. However, there were professionals in this area. The human witches of the far west, the soul shamans of the beastmen, and the moon elf priests of the elves all had God's descent physiques known as spiritual bodies. And the moon elves had a long history in this area. Moon elves had been an important role in the elf empire since ancient times. Throughout the elf empire's long history, all the high priests had been moon elves. Their natural spiritual bodies made it incredibly easy for moon elves to communicate with the true gods, and borrowing divine power to use super-divine arts was a natural talent of their species. And when Adrian joined Rose's side, the Spider Queen unhesitatingly chose him as her future descendant. Amelia's many setbacks were due to this natural poison imbued with divine power, which greatly countered her. God's descent. As Adrian muttered, a pitch-black light descended, and a mysterious black fog began to wrap around Adrian's body. Strange magical runes appeared on every part of his skin. Adrian knelt on the ground in pain, but all the spears and arrows thrown at him by the humans were blocked. Poison god Felix. It didn't take much thought to know that the corroded ground around Felix was a clear indication of his identity. He was the lucky one who had recently ascended to the divine throne. The dark elf god Felix had long since reached the peak of semi-god rank. With Rose's help, he had stolen the forest guardian god's divine concept. His original divine concept of forest sower and guardian god had mutated, and combined with the poison assassin Felix's own special abilities, he had become the poison of nature divine concept. And I didn't even need my own eyes to see who this opponent was. That was because at such a critical moment, my system wouldn't be willing to remain silent. Epic quest. Slay a god, quest hint. Kill the poison god Felix and let the foolish Rose taste the pain of losing her son again. Let her know what happens to those who go with the flow. Reward. Based on your contributions, it will be worth at least 50,000 fate points. Punishment for failure. Trust me, if you fail, there's no need for punishment. He's just a super weak god. You can't possibly fail, can you? Slay a god? You really think highly of me. Even if he's a super weak god who just became a true god, I wouldn't have any confidence in killing him. The Adrian before me was no longer in human form. The power of a true god was beginning to change his form. With a series of distortions, the boundary between reality and illusion was broken, and a gigantic black spider walked towards reality. He was even more evil than the devil lords in my nightmares, and even more majestic than dragons. Right now, that gigantic black spider's 8 eyes were glowing with greed. The digestive juices in its disgusting giant mouth had already melted the ground in front of it, and the venom in its tail was constantly seeping out. The poison only reached the tips of its feet, and the venom between its legs was enough to transform the ground into a poisonous swamp. Its divine power gave it extraordinary supernatural abilities. Just looking down at it would cause others to despair. Just looking at it would cause the weak-willed to fall into despair and madness. But, fight it to the death. We have nowhere to retreat to. At least don't die like a girl. That's right, there was no need for me to waste my breath or forcefully lead the way. We had nowhere to retreat to. Tui. Rose, I'm going to properly deal with you for this. I spat out a mouthful of blood as I once again raised my Roland's sacred sword and led the charge. I was prepared to complete this myth-ranked quest that belonged to me. With a god's descending body as the opponent, the battle was in dire straits. The huge spiders were so agile that they moved like precision machine tools, easily tearing apart the fortifications of the defensive line. Under the King of Poison's control, black mist surrounded its limbs. Magic spells and arrows were instantly destroyed before they could even come into contact with it. The most troublesome part was still that terrifying poisonous mist. Anyone who came into contact with it would instantly die. Those who didn't even get up yet would die. I've determined the divine power's attribute. It's not just pure poison, but also conceptual corrosion and withering. He's causing life to deform in advance. Absolutely don't touch it. The moment Heloise finished speaking, Felix's giant eyes locked onto her, and he spat out a mouthful of purplish-black venom. Felix wasn't a brainless beast. His senses were far superior. Even though he only had the appearance of a black cat, he was able to point out my divine domain and nature, which made me his #1 enemy. While the battle was in full swing, the orc chieftains were watching coldly from the high platform of a tower not far away. Don't we need to send troops to help? Isn't that our ally? A pig tribe leader seemed to be rather puzzled. Weren't they supposed to be the main characters of the battle? Why were they watching their ally go into battle while watching from the back? This wasn't the beastman's usual style. Help? Heh, if that spider really doesn't turn around and kill us after wiping out the humans, I'll have to thank the god of war for protecting me. Ally? He clearly has such great combat strength, yet he's watching us suffer heavy losses after a night of bloody battle, and now he's jumping out to help? If this isn't stealing the spoils of war, then what is? Beastmen simply preferred using their fists rather than their brains, and they weren't idiot. How could they not see through Rose's scheming? Almont spread out his single arm, and the slowly falling snowflakes landed on his palm. As they accumulated, they were melted into snow water by the warmth of his palm. Crack. Almont clenched his fist tightly, and a vicious glint appeared in his widened eyes. At this moment, he was undoubtedly the Beastman King. Prepare for battle, and finish organizing the troops before the snow falls. In this battle, no one, no race, is worthy of trust. Brave warriors, prepare to fight to the death for honor and our ancestral land. Even if we're destined to be buried here, we'll let this cruel world understand the backbone of us beastmen. Suddenly, an aged horn sounded from afar. That was a summon from a true ally. They're finally here. All the tribe leaders revealed delighted expressions. At this moment I had just received a scout's report, but I suddenly froze. How can there be more beastmen? Didn't they already send out their main forces? But from the direction of the incoming army, as well as the tribe's battle flag, I instantly understood. beastmen of the plains? That damned Omdorokan. Since the beastmen of the plateau region were capable of using earth elemental tunnels to reach human territory, then why couldn't the beastmen of the plains region do the same? Perhaps this was Omdorokan's final trump card. But right now there was nothing I could do. I thought that the venomous spider in front of me was already difficult enough to deal with. Heloise, prepare yourself. If we must die here, at least drag these bastards down with us. Suddenly, another battle drum sounded, and that familiar elven chant actually caused the huge spider to reveal a human-like expression of delight. As for me, after carefully listening to it, I also smiled. Finally, it's time.